The high-profile case of Denise Dragon is a vivid example of how youthful maximalism, morbid jealousy, and passion for illegal substances can lead to tragedy and destroy 3 young lives at once. The oldest participant, and I'm not afraid of this word, the main culprit of this story at the time of the tragedy was barely 22 years old, and the 2 girls whom he desperately tried to keep, playing with their feelings, were only 17 and 19 years old. Their love triangle didn't last long, leading to 2 pregnancies, manic stalking, and, eventually, cold-blooded murder. Mario Topanera was born in Spain in the suburbs of Madrid, a small town of Alcorcon, in 1996. The young man has never burdened himself with studying and finding a good job. In his 22 years, he lived in the house of his parents and interrupted by casual earnings. The main passion of the guy was graffiti. He drew perfectly, but he could not apply his talent as an artist anywhere, being satisfied with small part-time jobs, painting walls outside and inside buildings. Mario's main source of income was the sale of illegal substances. He did not do it himself, but found interested customers and brought them to a remote quarter of the city, where his acquaintance, who could get everything at the request of buyers. Topanera received a good percentage of each such transaction, so he was interested in finding such people. It is not known whether the parents knew what their son was doing, but if they did, they obviously turned a blind eye. It should be noted that Mario had a bright appearance and bold character. He enjoyed authority among friends and a lot of popularity among the opposite sex. The young man skillfully used his charm, easily made acquaintances, and often twirled romance with several girls at the same time, not intending to burden himself with serious relationships. Denise Maria Dragon was a native of Romania, where she was born in 2001 in the family of Emil and Daniela Dragon. The parents of the girl, at the time of her birth, were still very young and were in a difficult financial situation. Due to the circumstances, they were forced to go to work in Spain, leaving their little girl in the care of grandparents. A few years later, when the couple were able to legalize in a foreign country, get a good job, and more or less establish their everyday life, they took their little daughter to their home in sunny Spain. The girl quickly settled in and made friends in her new place. She found it easy to learn the language, and at school she got high marks in almost all subjects. In addition, the little girl took an interest in dancing, willingly spent several hours a day in the studio, and regularly participated in all kinds of competitions. When the girl was in middle school, the marriage of her parents gave a crack, and they decided to separate. After the divorce, the child was left to live with her mother, but her father, despite the fact that he had a new family, continued to take care of her, in all ways supported communication, helped financially, and in every way tried to take part in the life of his daughter. Soon her mother also remarried, and a year later the girl had a younger brother, whom she adored and spent a lot of time with him. At the age of 16, Denise decided that she wanted to master the art of hairdressing and become a stylist. She left her studies and dance classes, focusing entirely on her new hobby. Her parents did not discourage her or somehow prevent her, allowing her daughter to make her own choice. To gain experience, Denise got a job in a beauty salon, which belonged to her relatives. The third heroine of this dramatic story and the final link in the love triangle was a 19-year-old girl named Rocio Martinez. She was born and raised in the suburbs of Madrid. Her father was a policeman who was transferred to Alcorcon, where his whole family moved. Rocio from childhood was impulsive, scandalous, and sometimes even aggressive. She was used to always get what she wants, and did not tolerate rejection. Even at an early age, the girl was diagnosed with diabetes and serious heart problems, because of which she had to take medication on a regular basis to monitor her regimen and diet. But her health problems didn't keep her from bad company and experimenting with illegal substances. She consumed alcohol, tried drugs, and repeatedly took part in petty thefts and robberies together with her friends. However, thanks to her police officer father and his connections, Martinez was never prosecuted for her actions. Rocio believed in her impunity and that no matter what she did, her father would get her out of trouble. In addition, Rocio was quite beautiful. She always had a lot of admirers and admirers. When Denise left school and started working as a stylist, She had more free time, which she devoted to socializing with friends. Since high school, she had a best friend named Sylvia to whom Denise confided all her secrets and worries. One day, on a spring evening in 2018, walking around the city with her friend, the young lady accidentally met Mario. A handsome and cheerful guy immediately managed to charm Denise. A conversation started between them, and in the evening of the same day they exchanged phone numbers. Soon the young people had an affair. They saw each other almost daily, and their relationship developed rapidly. For the first time in her life, Denise truly fell in love, and her chosen one seemed to be her ideal. It also turned out that they had many common interests. They liked the same movies, the same music. They both adored dogs and dreamed of traveling the world. Just a few days after meeting, Denise invited her chosen one to a family dinner to introduce him to her mother. But Daniela did not approve of her daughter's choice. The woman immediately did not like Denise's lover. Something in him alerted her and even frightened her. Mother hastily made inquiries about him and was horrified when she learned that Mario is associated with the trade in illegal drugs. Daniela had a serious talk with her daughter, hoping that she would end her relationship with a guy with such a dubious reputation. Denise calmed her mother and promised her that she would break up with her lover, but in fact she continued to meet with him. Quite quickly, Denise realized that Mario is not so nice and kind as he wants to seem. The young man tried to control every step of his passport, wanted to know where she goes and with whom she communicates, without permission, took her phone and checked accounts and social networks. For several months, the girl in love hoped that her chosen one would change and they could build a strong and lasting relationship. But it only got worse. Mario began to consider her his property, which he can dispose of, and who must do everything only as he says. At the moment when Denise seriously considered breaking off the relationship, she was horrified to realize that she was pregnant. She didn't want to tie her life to this man and endure constant harassment. Besides, Denise was afraid that now Mario wouldn't leave her alone at all. On top of that, she was only 17 years old, and she herself was simply not ready for motherhood and responsibility for a new little life. Then Denise decided to talk frankly with her mother and told her everything, asking for advice on how to proceed. The woman listened to her daughter and recommended her to terminate the pregnancy, adding that the choice, in any case, will remain only for her. Denise thought it over once more and then followed her mother's advice by having an abortion. When Topanera found out about it, he was furious. The guy thought that Denise betrayed him, that she had no right to do so, and only he could decide what to do with this child. Relationships finally broke down, but the young man was not going to let Denise go and leave her alone. Moreover, he promised to take revenge on her for such betrayal and to hurt her as much as she hurt him. When Denise called her father in tears and told him about everything, Emile decided that his daughter needed to get away from all these difficult events that had shaken her peace of mind and go somewhere on vacation. He paid for his ex-wife and daughter a trip to one of the fashionable European resorts, where they went together. The vacation really did Denise good. She calmed down a little, relaxed, began to make plans for life again, and seemed to no longer think about Mario. But the vacation was over, and Denise returned home again. Mario did not long pine for his former passport, and almost immediately began an affair with 19-year-old Rocio Martinez. This fiery, aggressive, and conflicted girl was the complete opposite of the quiet and calm Denise. She could make a scandal in the same place, go into a fight, or throw a tantrum. Rocio also experimented with illegal substances and could easily break the law, knowing that she would not be punished for it. With Mario, they quickly got together and had fun together because the guy could get any illegal drug she asked for, wanting to test its effect on himself. However, Mario couldn't forget and let go of his ex-girlfriend. He still wanted to control her, to know where she was and what she was doing. Periodically, he wrote to her in social networks, called her, and even offered to resume the relationship. Denise, who had a very hard time with this breakup, met him from time to time and communicated with him, but was not going to reunite because of fear. When Martinez found out that her boyfriend was communicating with his ex, she made a terrible scandal, and in a fit of rage, screamed that she would kill them both. By that time, Mario had already realized what his chosen one was capable of, so he promised her that it would not happen again. However, Rocio's such an answer did not calm down, and she decided to destroy her rival, if not physically, then morally. Rocio began to call Denise, showering her with insults and wishing her a speedy death. But this was not enough, and she began to send messages to her rival with threats of violent reprisals. However, Dragon considered these threats to be empty words and did not consider it necessary to contact the police because of them. During that period, Rocio became pregnant, about which the first thing she wrote to her rival, saying that this child is desired and she will keep it. For Denise, this news was a painful blow. But soon Martinez, due to poor health and addiction to illegal substances, lost the child, and all her anger she again poured out in a new threatening message to Denise. Denise, eager to start a new life and soon forget about Mario, started an affair with a young man named Evan. The couple legalized their relationship just a month after meeting, and the young lady went to live in her husband's house. Apparently, Mario was hurt that his ex-girlfriend had married someone else so quickly. He started looking for meetings with her again, calling and texting her. In November 2018, when Mario and Rocio were having dinner at a small diner on the outskirts of the city, the guy went out for a while, leaving his phone on the table. Rocio, taking advantage of the moment, decided to check it out. There she came across the calls and messages Mario had been sending to Denise. Martinez immediately threw a tantrum. She screamed, cried, and tried to hit her young man. In response, Mario offered his girlfriend to personally clarify relations with Denise, to which she immediately agreed. He drove the furious Rocio to the new home of his former lover and pointed to the right door. Rocio got out of the car with a knife and went to the doorstep of her rival. At the time, Evan had not yet returned from work, and his young wife was home alone, talking on the phone with her friend Sylvia. When she heard a knock on the door, she assumed it was her husband and simply opened the door without looking through the peephole. Denise was still talking to her friend, so she could hear everything that happened next. When Denise saw her ex-lover's friend on the doorstep, she only had time to say her name in surprise and loudly before she was stabbed in the stomach. After that, Rocio immediately left, and the wounded Denise, losing consciousness, asked her friend to call an ambulance and told her who attacked her. Dragon was taken to the hospital in critical condition. Doctors fought desperately for her life for several hours, but the wound was too deep. She lost a lot of blood, and it was alas impossible to save her. After Rocio dealt the fatal blow to her rival, she ran back to the car, jumped into the cabin, and told Mario to get out of here. On the way, she confessed everything to him, and together they disposed of the crime weapon and washed the traces of blood off her hands and clothes. Mario decided it would be best for them to hide for a while. He called his relatives who lived in another city and asked them to visit. When they arrived, the relatives noticed that Rocio looked strange and was very nervous, but she wrote it off as malaise. The couple stayed overnight at Mario's relative's house, thinking about what to do and how to proceed. When they learned the next morning that Denise had died from the wound, Rocio immediately called her father and told him everything. She was sure that her dad would use all his connections to save her from jail. This time, however, the policeman father did not help his daughter, who had taken another man's life. He followed her to another city and then handed her over to the police himself. One of the main witnesses in the case was Sylvia, who at the time of the crime spoke to the deceased on the phone. The case file also included numerous threatening messages that Rocio had sent to her rival over the course of several months. The defendant initially tried to deny her guilt, but all the facts and evidence were against her. Then Rocio apparently began to lose her nerve, and she confessed to everything, giving a detailed account of the attack. She noted that it was Mario who pushed her to do it, who drove her to the victim's house and allowed her to take the knife that was in the car. Rocio suggested that he wanted to take revenge on Denise with her hands. Surprisingly, Topanera himself was only a witness in the case, not an accomplice. He completely denied his guilt and said that he only brought Rocio to his ex-girlfriend's house so that they could finally work things out and stop feuding. He also said he didn't realize Rocio had a knife and didn't see any blood on her hands or clothes when she returned to his car. At the next court hearing, the couple again denied their guilt, saying this time that they were not at the scene at all. Allegedly, they had spent the entire evening at Mario's relative's house, and Denise had been fatally stabbed by someone else. Martinez claimed that she had no hatred for her rival and had no motive to kill her. Nevertheless, Rocio's guilt was proven, and she went to prison for 18.5 years, but Mario remained completely unpunished. He almost immediately spun a new novel and, forgetting about any caution, began to brag that the girls fought him ready to kill each other. He told in detail about the events of that tragic evening, and this information quickly reached the parents of the dead Denise. The Dragon family again appealed to the court, demanding to punish the man who was responsible for the death of their daughter, and this time Topaner was taken into custody. But after a few days, the guy was released on his own recognizance. In the end, he was acquitted, and he was released again. Denise's parents tried several times to appeal the court decision, demanding to increase the term for Rocio and to put Mario in jail as an accomplice. However, to this day, Mario has not been brought to justice. On December 1st, 2022, the Mendoza Criminal Court stood waiting, holding its breath. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense, and the surrounding area was filled with people waiting for the verdict. On the dock sat a woman aged 32, dressed in a black dress, with white beads around her neck. Her face expressed not a single emotion, and her eyes burned with only equanimity and restraint. She was preparing to hear the judgment that would determine her fate and leave a mark on history. Everyone in the room had known this woman for many years, but now they were faced with a mystery that was difficult for them to understand. Outside the courtroom doors, the approaching footsteps of the judge could be heard, like the pounding of a heart, echoing in the silence and felt in every corner of the place. Everyone knew that what was at stake today was not only the fate of the woman in the dock, but also the truth that had remained in the shadows for so long. There was a whole story behind this woman, the events of which were as mysterious as she was. The truth of this real crime is hidden in the details, and the trial becomes a real challenge for all involved. Monado is a small town hidden among the mountains and valleys of the Argentine province of Mendoza. This is the place where nature reveals its most beautiful colors. In autumn, the streets are sprinkled with golden leaves, and the mountain peaks are painted in shades of orange and red. The residents of Monado know each other well, and everyone can tell the biography of their neighbors. Here, people share joys and sorrows, support each other in difficult moments, and celebrate important events together. In this secluded place, among the mountains and valleys, Rolando Angel Aquino and Karen Oviedo began a romance that would later shake Monado and all of Argentina. When the streets of the city, surrounded by colors of autumn gold, as if frozen in anticipation of something long awaited, the fates of the two young people of this story intertwined. Rolando Angel Aquino, a man with a magnetism capable of attracting the attention of others, could not help but notice the exciting gaze of Karen Oviedo. She was a woman with fire in her eyes, a passion for life, and an energy that instantly won his heart. The young people were very similar in their interests and dreams, and the determination and entrepreneurial thirst of both inspired them. This meeting was an accident that gave them a chance for true happiness. Finally, they found in this relationship what they had been looking for in others for so long. So in 2016, the lovers started living together and opened their own business, a warehouse, which was located in the house where they lived. Karen has always had a special eye for detail, and she lovingly created a sign on one of the windows for customer service. Next to it were lists of items for sale. It was their little corner that they were rightfully proud of. The people of Monado watched this happy and determined couple with interest and respect. Everyone wondered who these young people were and how they managed to accomplish so much. Many people knew Karen from childhood, but Rolando remained a mystery. No one knew anything about his past, except that he came from Bolivia. Rolando not only ran the business with Karen, but also worked at the fair in Guimalin, where wholesale fruit sales were held. Looking at this couple, it seemed like they had found their little paradise on earth. But sometimes, even the strongest and most sincere relationships can face a test. One day, Rolando was taken aback when he caught Karen in the car with another man. His reaction was a flash of anger. In that moment, he nearly destroyed everything inside the interior of the car. The picture of happiness crumbled in a matter of minutes. But then, Rolando agreed to give them a chance, choosing to forgive and continue to move forward with his beloved. In the eyes of others, they remained a model of an ideal couple, able to overcome all difficulties together. Rolando Angel Aquino is an enigmatic figure who was born in 1987 in Bolivia. His exact date of arrival in Argentina remains unknown, like many other aspects of his life. As the eldest of 7 children in his family, Rolando learned from an early age the value of family bonds and hard work. His ideal was a happy family filled with joy and children's laughter. In his youth, he met Carolina Chavez, from whom he later had a son. Despite the difficulties, the couple remained on good terms. Later in his life appeared Soledad Guardio, who gave him another son, Elias. Relationships with Soledad also did not work out. However, Rolando was always a devoted father who took care of his children. He kept in touch and always maintained a warm relationship with the mothers of his children. From a young age, Rolando was a physically fit man who took care of his health by playing sports and playing soccer for the local team. Colleagues and loved ones described him as a kind and very hardworking man. Neighbors in his neighborhood got along well with him, but Rolando always showed a distinct shyness in socializing. Karen was born March 30th, 1990, and spent her childhood and youth in Minato, in the same house where she and Rolando later established their warehouse. She was well known among the locals as an outgoing and open-minded woman. Like Rolando, Karen dreamed of a happy and successful family with a caring and devotedly loving man. However, it took her some time to find the one man with whom she could build her happiness. Before meeting Rolando, Karen had already attempted to create a happy relationship that resulted in the birth of 2 wonderful girls. One of her former partners, Raul Ojeda, became the father of one of them, and Karen married him in 2013. However, as time went on, that marriage was on the verge of breaking up. According to Raul, financial difficulties were one of the reasons for the conflict. Worried about his life and in search of new opportunities, Raul decided to leave his family. On the pretext of buying some necessary item, he fled the city and traveled abroad, changing buses to make it difficult to track his whereabouts. In this way, he sought to evade all attempts to locate him. In the summer of 2019, 9-year-old Elias arrived at Rolando and Karen's house. They had many plans for the near future that they wanted to spend together. However, on the morning of July 12, 2019, when Rolando came to wish his son a good morning before leaving for work, he noticed that the boy was not feeling well. The father immediately decided to take his son to the children's hospital to see a pediatrician. There, after examination, it became clear that Elias's condition is critical, and he was immediately sent to the intensive care unit. Despite the best efforts of the medical staff, little Elias died shortly after he was brought to the hospital. The amazing thing was that he left home perfectly healthy, without any unusual symptoms, and arrived at his father's house also perfectly healthy. However, the medical report was devastating. It stated that Elias died of 3rd-degree poisoning, which caused multi-organ failure and cerebral thrombosis. These conclusions left Elias's parents in complete bewilderment, as their son seemed to be completely healthy and active, and suddenly died of an incomprehensible disease. Following their professional duty, the doctors insisted on conducting an additional forensic medical examination. However, Elias's mother and grandmother, dumbfounded by the loss, refused this procedure. Karen offered to cremate the boy's body, but Elias's mother also refused, preferring to bury her son in a private cemetery so that she could come and lay flowers on his grave. Elias's death was a blow that broke Rolando's heart. He was devastated by the unexpected loss of his youngest son. The caring and loving Karen never left Rolando for a moment. She took care of all the business, carefully supported her boyfriend, and helped him through his pain and grief. Over time, with the warmth and support of the woman he loved, the pain began to subside. 16 months after this terrible tragedy, Rolando decided to take a big step and propose to Karen. They got married, and the man was sure that this woman would always be by his side. However, their happiness turned out to be short-lived. On February 6, 2022, Karen returned home after a beauty salon and working out at the gym, and noticed that Rolando began to experience serious health problems. The next day, February 7th, she found a medical ambulance outside their home. Rolando, 35, suddenly felt very ill. After vomiting profusely, he collapsed in the living room of their home, and the housekeeper called for emergency medical help. The doctors allowed Karen to pass to her husband. When Rolando was taken to the Santa Maria clinic, his condition was critical. Despite the efforts of the medical staff, the young man passed away on February 9th. The cause of his death was severe poisoning. Given that Rolando was a healthy man who was active in sports, the medical staff began to ask questions of his wife. Karen confirmed that Rolando was taking medication to remove dark spots on his skin. For specialists, this information was highly suspicious. Tests revealed a significant excess of calcium oxalate crystals in Rolando's system, which is a characteristic sign of poisoning by ethylene glycol, the main component of antifreeze for cars. The investigation into this strange and unexpected death of Rolando became a high priority for authorities. The prosecutor's office was actively investigating the neighborhood where the Aquino couple lived. Neighbors became important witnesses, reporting that Karen had repeatedly given her husband some unknown medication. They were aware that she used these medications to go to a party without her husband. However, neighbors also expressed doubts about what happened to Rolando's son, which led investigators to think and consider the theory that Karen may have only wanted to temporarily sedate her husband rather than take his life. However, the findings of the Technology Crimes Unit officers completely ruled out this hypothesis. Requests for various forensic examinations were sent, and Karen, the wife of the deceased, was thoroughly questioned. Many contradictions arose during the interrogation. The investigating officers called on Karen to name the substance she had slipped to her husband before his death. The woman claimed that it was just a skin blemish remedy and that she had administered it through an IV. However, when she was asked to provide a vial of the solution, Karen said that the housekeeper had already thrown the drug away. A further interview was then conducted with the housekeeper, Claudia Cortez, who denied Karen's statement regarding the discarded vial. She also reported that she had overheard a conversation between the couple in which Rolando expressed dissatisfaction with the medication he was receiving. Karen was detained during the investigation, and her cell phone was seized. Rolando's family, friends, and teammates were shocked by the news of his death. For visitors to the Aquino couple's warehouse and other locals, it was also a shock. No one could understand what had happened or why the father of the family had bid farewell to the world so suddenly. Raul, Karen's ex-husband, was extremely surprised when rumors of a deliberate poisoning began to spread. He claimed that his ex-spouse was always affectionate and never violent towards him. After analyzing the suspect's phone, it was discovered that Karen had searched a search engine for information on the deadliest poisons and how to clear her search history. In addition, records of her 2 ethylene glycol orders from an online store were found. The Agency for Toxic Substances, as well as the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, found that it is a synthetic substance that absorbs water and is used in the production of antifreeze. This product is odorless, has a sweet taste, and is extremely dangerous to humans. With the preliminary results of the forensic examination and all the information discovered, the prosecutor's office charged Karen with willfully poisoning Rolando with a poisonous substance diluted with orange juice. Consumption of this beverage caused Rolando's health to seriously deteriorate, and he died. A series of strange and tragic events in the Aquino family forced the authorities to take drastic action. By mid-February, with enough evidence against Karen, an aggravated murder charge was filed. In parallel, suspicions surfaced as to the cause of 9-year-old Elias's death, triggering a new investigation. The prosecutor's office decided to conduct a detailed investigation into the boy's medical history. The mother claimed that Elias was fully healthy and active, and that he had suddenly gone into a coma while at his father's house, from which he never came out. The boy's death certificate indicated that the cause was a malfunction of his internal systems and cerebral thrombosis. However, investigators persistently doubted that Elias, at age 9, could have died of such causes, especially given his overall health. The prosecutor's office requested information about possible purchases of ethylene glycol and received a response confirming that Karen purchased the poison on July 2, 2019, shortly before the boy arrived at the Aquino home. Information from Elias's relatives also confirmed that Karen insisted on cremating his body, but the birth mother rejected the idea and preferred to bury her son. The evidence gathered was enough for prosecutor Claudia Rios to file new aggravated murder charges against Karen on March 4th, related to the poisoning of Elias. On March 14th, a judge ordered pre-trial detention for the woman, who tried to appeal, but the judge rejected it, affirming that she should remain behind bars until the trial began. That trial began 10 months later and was an important step in unraveling this complex and dark story. The long-awaited trial began in the Mendoza Criminal Court, attracting public immediate attention. November 28, 2022 was the beginning of the nationwide trial of Karen Oviedo. 2 indictments were pending. The first, led by prosecutor Fernando Guzzo, concerned the murder of Elias, and the second, involving Claudia Rios, touched on the murder of Rolando. When the trial began, Rolando's eldest son, Javier Aquino, who was only 15 years old, appeared as a plaintiff, supported by counsel. Prosecutor Guzzo argued that Karen killed first Elias, and then his father by giving them ethylene glycol mixed with orange juice. This led to the severe poisoning and death of the son and father. Karen's defense representatives sought to refute the charges against her. They argued that Rolando was violent and abusive to their client, and that there was no credible evidence to support the allegations. The defense also stressed that Karen had no motive for the murder. Why would she kill Elias? Obviously, little Elias could not have posed a threat. Karen's attorney pointed out that the house, cars, and business belonged only to her. He also argued that her client had not made any purchases through her phone, and why would she have searched the internet for information about poisons when she had already used ethylene glycol to poison Elias, as the prosecutor claimed. The lawyer emphasized that while the actions that led to the deaths of the father and son are heinous, it does not give the right to indict a person until they are fully proven guilty. The defense attempted to sow doubt among the jury by arguing that the charges against Karen were false, and Karen claimed that the antifreeze purchase could have been made by her partner by hacking into her account. She also claimed she had an alibi for when her husband was poisoned. On February 6th, Karen was not at home when he began having health problems. The defendant, known to the media as the Guaymalan poisoner, was given the opportunity to speak after the initial phase of the trial was over. Judge Diego Liberty allowed her to speak, and Karen passionately argued that she was being accused of a horrific crime she did not commit. It was extremely painful for her to realize this, especially since she was the mother of 2 young daughters. The court hearing continued, and it was the turn of witness testimony that revealed new aspects of the case. The prosecution decided to address several questions to Karen. Prosecutor Guzzo, focusing on key points, asked her if Karen had suggested that her son Rolando be cremated. To this question, Karen responded emphatically that the decision on this matter was not up to her, and she had never made any such suggestion. The prosecution called as witnesses relatives of the deceased to reveal further details of what had happened. Soledad, Elias's mother, told the court that after her son's death, Rolando relayed to her Karen's words, in which she suggested that Elias's body be cremated so that both families could keep the boy's ashes. However, Soledad rejected the idea. She also shared her memories of meeting Rolando at the cemetery, where she was told about Karen's jealousy. According to her, Karen even slept in a separate bed, that the relationship between Rolando and Karen was so tainted that the couple slept separately. Another witness was Carolina, the mother of Rolando's first child. She confirmed that according to her ex-husband, the couple slept separately, but Carolina herself had not had any interaction with Karen prior to the incident. However, on the morning of February 8th, Karen herself called her to inform her that Rolando was sick and in the hospital. Karen told Carolina that her husband had probably taken some medication and was feeling ill. She also asked Carolina to help her unlock her husband's cell phone, claiming that she had suspicions that he was seeing another woman. Carolina was shocked to learn of Rolando's condition, as they had seen each other just a few days ago and he seemed perfectly healthy. She revealed that when she arrived at the hospital, Karen was already there and had gone to see the doctors. Caroline wasn't allowed inside, so she was left waiting. Later, as she was leaving the hospital, Karen told her that no one else was there and everyone had left. This made Caroline very suspicious, and she demanded an explanation from the doctors, to which the doctor announced that the patient had lost consciousness and was not responding to treatment. Caroline then went to the hospital secretary and complained. After talking to Karen, Carolina learned that Rolando had taken medication for skin blemishes, after which he had had an allergic reaction. She claimed that the medication bottle no longer existed because the housekeeper had thrown it away. All these details added to the mystery of this complex case. The trial continued, and now doctors and experts stood before the jury to present forensic evidence and the results of a psychological examination. This evidence threw light on details that had gone unnoticed earlier. Dr. Ivana Marimelli, a pediatrician at the hospital, described how she cared for Elias in July 2019 when the boy was hospitalized. She described that Elias was brought to the medical facility with severe breathing difficulties and urgently required intubation. He also underwent a CT scan which revealed a deep cerebral thrombosis. Elias was given a course of intensive care. The doctor also confirmed that the symptoms that Elias had were consistent with ethylene glycol poisoning. This included impaired consciousness, restlessness, and a subsequent coma accompanied by a blood clotting disorder. Despite the best efforts of medical personnel, the boy's condition worsened, and after 5 p.m. on July 12th, cardiac and respiratory arrest ensued. Doctors tried to resuscitate Elias for 50 minutes with the participation of his father, but all efforts were futile. He was pronounced dead at 6 p.m. The jury also read the results of Karen's psychological examination, conducted at the request of the prosecution. In their findings, the experts emphasized that Karen had lied and concealed the truth. She was presented as a person seeking to create an image of a decent person, but in reality she was characterized as cold and cruel. In their conclusions, the experts also noted that a psychological examination was conducted immediately after Karen's husband's death, but did not reveal any emotional effects related to the loss of her spouse. This raised doubts about Karen's sincerity and characterized her as a cold-blooded and self-focused woman. The examiners found evidence of latent hostility and impulsive behavioral reactions in Karen. Finally, a prosecutor Vuzo expressed doubt that Karen was a victim of gender-based violence as she portrayed herself in her testimony. All of this information described the true psychological profile of the defendant. The long weeks of tense waiting and continuous court hearings came to a close. The trial brought many people together in the courtroom, their eyes fixed tensely on the jury and the judge, awaiting the decision that would bring justice to this complex and tragic story. The prosecutor, in moving for a judgment of conviction against Karen, assured the jury that all the evidence gathered strongly suggested that she was the one who planned and committed both murders. She purchased ethylene glycol in cold blood, disposed of the packaging, and disguised it as regular juice. Karen watched her loved ones die without providing help in their moment of suffering. Prosecutor Claudia Rios, who was prosecuting Karen's case for Rolando's murder, provided the court with an ethylene glycol purchase sheet paid from Karen's bank account. The prosecution and the plaintiff insisted that the jury reach a unanimous verdict because that would be the only way to achieve justice in the case. They insisted that Karen Oviedo be found guilty of murder with evidence of extreme cruelty. The defense, on the other hand, insisted that there was insufficient evidence to fully prove her client's guilt. The defense attorney argued that a person can be good or bad, but that it is not always related to the commission of a crime, and that for their client, the death of Rolando and his son was an incredible tragedy and a sad event. However, despite the arguments of the defense, Karen Oviedo has put herself on the list of Argentine criminals who poisoned their victims. After a long silence and tense waiting for the verdict, the jury made their decision. They handed down a unanimous verdict. Karen Oviedo was found guilty of killing Elias and committing the crime with particular cruelty. She was also found guilty of Rolando's aggravated death by insidious procedure. Karen, standing in her black outfit with white beads around her neck, listened to the verdict without apparent emotion. The jury reached a guilty verdict. She was awarded a life sentence in prison. Karen Oviedo, the woman in the dock, tried to escape punishment for the treacherous murders that shook society and left many unsolved questions. Her plans to cremate the bodies of the victims may have been her last attempt to escape the punishment she deserved. However, despite her tricks, the court and jury did not give in and rendered a just verdict. So why did Karen Oviedo kill her loved ones? That remains a mystery. She had everything she needed to be happy. Perhaps the motive lies in the depths of her own soul, in jealousy, self-interest, pride. Karen refused to admit her guilt, which is why the motives behind this horrific crime remain unclear. Karen Oviedo will now face long years behind bars, pondering what dark forces may have so badly ruined her and those around her. This is a story that reminds us that even the closest of relationships can hide terrible secrets and mysteries, and that true love and loyalty must always come first. Taking the life of one's children is not just a heinous criminal offense. Such a desperate step can be pushed by a woman's altered consciousness under strong substances or by a painful psycho-emotional state when the body cannot cope with stress. The high-profile case of Veronica Youngblood has become a vivid and horrible example of how disturbed psyche, unhealthy relationships, and constant stress can lead to irreversible consequences. Veronica committed a terrible crime, but at the trial, the young woman claimed that despite what she had done, she had always been a good mother and wished her children only good. This story evokes both anger and pity, but to understand what exactly pushed Veronica to such a terrible and inhumane act, you need to look back a few decades and see what she had to go through. Perhaps her own childhood traumas played no small part in this, but this does not absolve her of responsibility. Veronica Youngblood's abusive childhood. Veronica Youngblood, maiden name Castro, was born in 1986 in the suburbs of Santa Rosa in central Argentina. She was the eldest of two daughters in the family and was raised with her sister Mayra, who was born in 1988. The girl's childhood was poor and full of hardship, but not even hunger and lack of basic necessities was the worst. Her parents did not work anywhere, abused alcohol, and took their anger out on their eldest daughter, beating her almost daily, sometimes to such an extent that she could not walk. Grandfather also did not harbor any warm feelings for his own granddaughters, considering them extra hungry mouths that need to be fed. From an early age, Veronica got used to the fact that she had nowhere to wait for protection and support. She felt superfluous in her own family, and the only truly close person to her was only her younger sister. When the girl was 14 years old, her parents divorced and separated. Her father was not interested in the fate of his daughters, but her mother, who was actively trying to organize her personal life, did not need children. Veronica was forced to become an escort to support herself and her younger sister without any education because she saw no other way out. At the age of 15, she became pregnant, and at the age of 16, she gave birth to her first child, a daughter Sharon. She never gave her eldest daughter's father's name, and probably didn't know it herself, having gotten pregnant by one of her many clients, a follower of a strange cult. As a teenager, without support and help, the girl joined a rather strange South American religious cult called Umbanda. It was a combination of heterogeneous beliefs and cult positions, among which were the foundations of Catholicism, spiritualism, and African cults. In Umbanda, it is customary to honor spirit guides who are able to communicate with the souls of dead people. The followers of the cult also believe in reincarnation and spiritual development through various practices. Veronica, being an impressionable and driven girl, was quickly imbued with the peculiarities of this belief, and according to the memories of her younger sister, she herself began to believe that she could make contact with spirits and communicate with the dead. Veronica did talk about hearing voices and seeing dreams, and also believed that after death, the soul of each person is reborn for a better life. Most likely, such a specific religious cult was fertile ground for the development of mental illness, given Veronica's difficult childhood and her own parents' abuse of her. The other followers of the cult treated her with kindness and love, which is what she lacked the most, so she believed literally every word they told her, moving to the United States, meeting Ronald Youngblood. When exactly Veronica decided to move to the United States of America, it is not known, but it happened in the late 2000s, when she was a little more than 20 years old. Taking her young daughter, she settled in Hampton Roads, in the state of Virginia. There, the attractive young woman took a job with an escort service company. In late 2008, Veronica met a guy whose name was Ronald Youngblood. He was a few years older than her and served as a pilot in the U.S. Navy. He and Veronica first met when Ronald used the services of the company she worked for. Apparently, Ronald was immediately attracted to this young person because he himself expressed a desire to continue to communicate. Soon, he insisted that Veronica left the escort, after which they began to live together. And in 2009, in one of the chapels in Las Vegas, the couple officially legalized their relationship, arranging a modest ceremony without guests. After the wedding, Veronica's life became stable for the first time, and she was not afraid to look into the future and confidently made plans. She had her own home, a caring husband with a stable job, who fully provided for her, while Veronica could be engaged in creating home comfort. But most importantly, Ronald took her daughter Sharon as his own, surrounding her with care and love. In 2013, the couple had their common child, daughter Brooklyn. The couple was over the seventh heaven from happiness, and the eldest heiress was happy that she had a baby sister, Sharon Youngblood. After the wedding, Ronald gave Veronica and her oldest daughter his last name, although officially the child he did not adopt. Nevertheless, the girl called him Daddy and reached out to him. Ronald himself tried not to deny her anything, paid attention, and engaged in the upbringing of the child. Sharon grew up quite bright, sociable, and purposeful girl. She studied well in school, had a lot of friends, was active and friendly. From an early age, she was involved in sports, was a member of the school cheerleading team, played tennis, but the girl achieved the greatest success in figure skating. Coach, who worked with Sharon, noted how easy and at ease she felt on the ice, as if in his native element. In childhood and adolescence, she regularly participated in various figure skating competitions, where she repeatedly won prizes. She was prophesied a brilliant sports career, noting the tenacity and diligence of the young figure skater. But alas, it was not destined to come true. Unstable family life. After several years of living together, the relationship between Ronald and Veronica began to deteriorate. Both spouses had difficult characters. They were excessively emotional and unyielding. If at first they managed to find compromises, then now neither of them did not want to make concessions. Moreover, the spouses began to do many things to each other for evil, because of which between them often began to erupt scandals with violent clarification of relations, mutual accusations, and insults. In addition, Ronald was very jealous and overbearing. If before the wedding he promised to forget about what his chosen one used to do, now he reminded her of it, every chance he got. He said that he pulled her out of the mud, provided for her, took her child, and now he demands to live by his rules. Family quarrels began to escalate into physical assaults, with the husband and wife taking turns to be the instigators of the fights. The police received complaints of domestic violence from both sides, but in most cases, these reports were soon withdrawn, and the spouses continued to live together. To be fair, the children were not involved in their parents' squabbles and were never physically hurt, although their emotional state can only be guessed at. In 2014, Ronald was sent to Central America, to the Republic of Honduras for duty, and his family followed him. During this period, relations between the spouses became very acute. Veronica complained to the local police that her husband was raising his hand against her, restricting her finances by blocking her card and forbidding her to use the internet and car. Ronald later said in his defense that he did so because he found out that his spouse was cheating on him. The husband thought that by depriving his wife of money, personal transportation, and the ability to communicate with her lover, he would keep her at home. As a result, Veronica filed a complaint with the U.S. Embassy and had her husband extradited from Honduras and returned to the United States. However, this incident did not affect his career, and he was soon transferred to Washington, D.C., to the main department of the country's Navy. However, relations between the couple finally soured. Breakup and ongoing conflicts. In 2016, the spouses moved to Florida, the place of Ronald's new appointment. By that time, they had already virtually separated, but continued to live together under one roof, and Ron still fully supported Veronica and daughters. By the beginning of 2017, the family moved again, this time to the small town of Oakton, which is in the state of Virginia, where the spouses began the official divorce process. But even during the dissolution of marriage, Ron and Veronica did not separate. They lived in the same house, although apparently they simply could not stand each other anymore. Both later claimed that no matter what, they wanted to raise children together, but in fact, Veronica had no source of income and could not even rent a room for herself. The issue of future custody of the children became especially acute, and Veronica realized that she would not be able to raise the children on her own because they were all completely dependent on Ronald. He also realized this and did not miss the opportunity to remind his wife of this, sometimes descending to outright blackmail, which brought the young woman to hysterics. At some point, driven to despair, Veronica decided to take a loan from the bank to have at least some of their own funds. However, as a guarantor, she specified her still legal husband without informing him. When Ronald received a call from the bank, another scandal broke out. Naturally, he refused to act as guarantor, and the actions of his wife became for him another reason to humiliate her. True, a couple of months later, the couple was finally able to agree, and the scandals between them for a while subsided. According to the court decision, they could continue to live together, and together bring up their children, while neither of them will be charged alimony. But that truce didn't last long. In the fall of 2017, Ronald filed a lawsuit against Veronica, accusing her of aggressive and inadequate behavior. He stated that the spouse smashed his smartphone, launching it into the wall, drowned in a basin of water with a working laptop, and also smashed the windshield of his car with a stone. After that, Veronica was obliged to move out and forbade her to go near Ron. At the same time, the youngest daughter, Brooklyn, was temporarily given full custody of her father until the next court hearing. 3 weeks later, the divorce proceedings were finalized, but having received a certificate of divorce, the former spouses began to live together again, and it seemed even reconciled. Courts and custody battle. About 6 months later, the former spouses appeared in court together again, but this time they provided a multi-page agreement detailing their plan for custody of their shared daughter. All the matter is that Ronald was transferred to the state of Missouri, and the former wife and children moved with him. But before Veronica wanted to officially settle a number of nuances regarding the custody of their daughter, Brooklyn. The agreement stated that Ronald would provide his ex-wife with housing that would be close to his home so they could raise their daughter together. The court approved the document in April 2018, and the move itself was scheduled for August of that year. But a month later, Veronica unexpectedly changed her decision and went to court again. The young woman turned for help to a lawyer, who had to confidently draw up and make a number of changes to the previously approved agreement. Veronica said she was doing this because of changed circumstances. By then, she had finished her nursing school training and had been offered a job in Oakton with a good salary. That way, she could more or less support herself and the girls, and there was no need to move after her ex-husband. In addition, the new job promised to help her find and pay for her own place to live. Due to her new circumstances, Veronica now sought full custody of her daughter Brooklyn, which she specified in an amendment to the agreement. The new hearing was held in July 2018, a month before the previously scheduled departure to Missouri. But the court refused to make any changes to the previously approved agreement, and the former spouses were to move to another state to share custody of their shared daughter, as previously agreed. Veronica seemed to agree with the court's decision, as she made no further attempt to challenge it. 2 weeks after the last court hearing, Ronald filed a legal notice with his new address where he would live after the move, which was less than a month away. Only a few minor details needed to be finalized, and he was on his way. Everything seemed to be going according to plan, but Sharon and Brooklyn had only days to live. Disturbing call. Toward evening, on August 5, 2018, emergency services received a disturbing call from 15-year-old Sharon. The girl was crying and gasping in pain. She begged to be saved and talked about how much she wanted to live. She said she was badly injured, and when the cameraman asked what had happened, she said she had just been shot with a gun by her own mother. According to Sharon, she and her younger sister were asleep when their mom walked into the room and shot Brooklyn. At the sound of the gunshot, the older sister woke up and was literally numb with fear. She asked her mom, "What are you doing?" Veronica replied that she was taking her daughters to God. Sharon tried to run away, but Veronica shot her in the back. With her last strength, she made it to the next room, where she locked herself in and called emergency services. The operator assured Sharon that help was on its way and asked her to hold on for a few more minutes, but then he heard the girl screaming in despair, followed by another gunshot. Then there was a frightening silence and the call was cut off. The police and paramedics arrived on the scene by 10 o'clock in the evening, and a horrifying picture was revealed before them. By this time, Ronald, who was on business in another city, had also called the emergency services, asking them to send someone to his house immediately because his ex-wife, according to him, might have done something terrible. Veronica had already called him and told him everything, but Ron refused to believe in the truth of her words. Sharon was the first to be found lying on the floor with 2 gunshot wounds, one to the chest and one to the back. Amazingly, despite the massive blood loss, she still had a faint pulse and was desperately clinging to life. Sharon was quickly taken to the intensive care unit of the nearest hospital, but despite the efforts of doctors, the next day, she died. Brooklyn's breathless body was discovered in her bedroom, in her own bed. She had been killed by a single gunshot to the head. The girl's father arrived about an hour later, rushing home as fast as he could. But Veronica's whereabouts remained unknown until the emergency services received another call from one Manuel Bellows, who reported Veronica's whereabouts. Who is Manuel? Manuel was one of the lawyers the young woman consulted with in the spring of 2018 regarding custody of her youngest daughter. Veronica, as the lawyer later argued in court, immediately struck him as a rather serious, collected, and responsible young woman fighting for custody of her beloved daughters. In addition, she was very attractive in appearance, divorced, and not in a relationship at the time. The two soon hit it off, quickly developing into a tumultuous love affair. Only a few months later, Manuel noticed some oddities in her behavior, which alerted him in particular it was the religious views of Veronica and her frightening statements about the upcoming meeting with God. At the end of July, Veronica called Manuel and invited him to her home, saying that they needed to have a serious talk. When he arrived, the young woman was home alone. Her ex-husband and children were staying with Ronald's relatives. The lights were off in the house, but candles were burning everywhere, creating a romantic atmosphere, and there was a dinner for 2 on the table. She confided in him that she had lost the nursing position she had been looking forward to and had refused to move to another state because of it. Veronica also shocked her boyfriend with the news that she was pregnant by him. This information was later unconfirmed. Manuel did not know how to react to this, and Veronica tried to seduce him and inclined him to intimacy. According to Manuel, nothing happened between them that night because he felt a strange discomfort and threat coming from Veronica, as if his life was in danger. He asked her for time to think about how to proceed, and then hurriedly left her house. On the evening of August 5th, Manuel heard someone ring the doorbell at his house. He opened the door and saw Veronica on the doorstep. She was frighteningly calm, and there was no emotion on her face at all. Veronica asked to be let into the house, but before Manuel could do so, he saw a gun in her hands, and he was scared shitless. He said he would call the police if she did not leave immediately, but Veronica, with the same stony face, replied that he could do so since she no longer cared. She then added that she had killed her daughters, so the police were already looking for her anyway. After these words, Manuel got really scared. He closed the door and hurried to the phone. While Veronica went back to the rental car, she came in and just waited to be arrested. The arrest and the full picture of the crime. When the police arrived at Manuel's house, Veronica was sitting in the car in the driver's seat, and next to her, in the passenger seat, lay the loaded gun she had used hours earlier to shoot her daughters. The young woman did not resist. There was still no emotion on her face. In addition to the gun, 2 more full magazines were found in the car. Already at the station, Veronica confessed that she had bought the gun 10 days ago at an exhibition in order to kill her daughters and then take her own life. According to her, She decided to take this desperate step to take revenge on her ex-husband and prevent him from taking their common daughter, Brooklyn. She also added that her personal life didn't work out and she became depressed. Apparently, the eldest daughter noticed the strange behavior of her mother and suspected something wrong because a few days before the tragedy, she directly asked her if she was going to kill them. But what the mother answered her remains a mystery. In the afternoon, on August 5th, Veronica gave her daughters sweets, in which she had previously mixed sleeping pills so that the girls would not resist. When they went to their room and fell asleep, the mother took out a prepared gun, loaded it, and went to her daughters. First, she went to Brooklyn's crib, put the gun to her head, and pulled the trigger. The gunshot woke up Sharon, who didn't immediately realize what was happening, and asked her mother about it. Veronica replied that she would take her and her sister to God, then pointed the gun at her eldest daughter. But Sharon jumped out of bed, rushing to the door, and was immediately shot in the back. She managed to run to the next room and call for help while her mother tried to open the door. When Veronica did enter the room, Sharon screamed and took a second bullet to the chest. Veronica then called her ex-husband and told him what she had done and was now going to take her own life as well. She blamed Ronald for everything, saying that she hated him and that he had ruined her life. However, the young woman then changed her mind about leaving her life for some reason and went to her boyfriend's house, where she was arrested. Youngblood fully admitted her guilt, and when she was asked what punishment she would give herself, the woman said that it should be the death penalty. It is noteworthy that in the state of Virginia, such a measure has not been practiced for a long time, and Veronica knew about it. Trial and sentencing. Initially, the defendant refused the services of a lawyer and fully admitted her guilt. But then, she abruptly changed her testimony and decided to use the help of a public defender. She later claimed that she heard voices ordering her to do this to her daughters, and she complied. Veronica also said that she had a harsh childhood, from which she remembered only beatings and hunger, and that her ex-husband had finally killed her belief that there was anything good waiting for her in life. She added that she did not want the same fate to befall her daughters. The trial took a long time because Veronica refused to leave her cell to attend the sessions. In addition, she attempted to commit suicide several times, but did so in such a way that she was saved each time and did not cause any serious harm to herself. The defense lawyer tried to convince the court that his client suffers from a mental disorder developed against the background of childhood traumas, the influence of a religious cult, and the abuse of her ex-husband. The defense lawyer also argued that Veronica was in an insane state at the time of the crime and did not realize her actions. But despite all the efforts of the lawyer, the court saw in the actions of the woman cold calculation, because she had purchased weapons in advance, fed the children sweets with sleeping pills, and then proceeded to implement her terrible plan. Her actions were not spontaneous. They could not be written off as a state of affect or a sharp aggravation of mental disorder. The final verdict in the case was handed down in March 2023. Veronica was found guilty and sentenced to 78 years in prison. In fact, this term will be a life sentence for her. It is worth noting that many people found Ronald's behavior in court strange. He did not look like a grief-stricken father, and when his former wife, sobbing, testified, he smirked. After the verdict, he only remarked that he was quite happy with the outcome.
According to statistics, approximately 30% of violent crimes committed around the world remain unsolved, despite the rapid development of technology and techniques, as well as the creation of extensive DNA databases. As a rule, most of these crimes are solved on hot tracks, but there are cases when the investigation lasts for years or even decades before the perpetrator is punished. But the Ellen Greenberg case, which we will look at in this video, is interesting in that for many years of investigation, it has hardly moved forward. The case has been investigated with numerous irregularities, and over time, there are more questions than answers. The brutal murder of a young woman to this day remains a mystery, and what is remarkable is that the investigation is trying hard to prove that the cheerful Ellen, who was enthusiastically preparing for her own wedding, suddenly decided to leave her life. But let's try to understand everything in order. Who is Ellen Greenberg? Ellen was born in New York in June 1993 in the family of Sanna and George Greenberg. She was the only child of her parents, growing up in love and care. During high school, the girl was actively engaged in team sports and even gave hope as a promising athlete. She was an active, restless, and sociable child, but at the same time studied well, showing a special interest in the humanities. After graduating from high school, Ellen became a student at Pennsylvania State University, where she received a degree in public relations. But having started working on a specialty, Greenberg realized that this is not what she would like to devote her life to. Parallel to work, the girl enrolled in the correspondence department of the Pedagogical Institute. A few years later, she brilliantly defended her diploma and moved to Philadelphia, where she was hired to work in one of the local schools as a junior high school teacher. According to relatives, Ellen's life was going great. She was full of enthusiasm, made big plans for the future, and simply adored her work and small students. At the same time, Ellen met a boy with whom she had a torrid affair, and soon they began to prepare for their wedding. The girl's favorite was a young man named Samuel, or just Sam, Goldberg. He was from a fairly wealthy and well-known family in the city. His parents owned their own large business, and his uncle had a reputation as one of the best lawyers in the state. The young men met in 2009 at a party, thanks to their mutual acquaintances, and immediately liked each other. The friendly interaction quickly turned into a rapidly developing romantic relationship, and soon they decided to move in together and live together. On the eve of 2011, Sam made his beloved a proposal, which was the best gift for the new year. He gave her a beautiful diamond ring, and the couple began to prepare for the upcoming wedding, which was scheduled for the spring of the same year. Family members of both young people took the news with joy, and it seemed that the happiness of lovers can no longer interfere with anything. Ellen plunged headlong into the pleasant troubles associated with the wedding, making lists of guests and sending them invitations, choosing a venue and elements of decor for the event, trying on wedding dresses, trying to create their ideal image, and planning a honeymoon. It is noteworthy that almost all these issues the bride was engaged in independently, and the groom did not visibly participate in the process. But loved ones did not attach much importance to this, and Helen never complained. True, there were some oddities, to which everyone paid attention only after the tragedy occurred. In January 2011, the weather in the city was very snowy and frosty. On the 26th, Ellen went to work at school as usual. But close to noon, there was a strong wind and a blizzard, so classes were canceled and students and teachers were sent home. Ellen returned to the apartment she and Sam shared. It was in a cozy apartment complex located in one of the quiet areas of the city. Soon Sam returned home as well. According to some reports, the couple that day quarreled, which was mentioned in passing, and Sam himself, but later he began to deny it. Close to 5 p.m., Sam decided to go to the gym located in the same apartment complex. He was gone for less than 1 hour, but when he returned, he could not get into the apartment because the door was locked from the inside. Sam first knocked loudly and insistently, then began calling his fiancée by name, which attracted the attention of neighbors, and then began calling her on the phone and sending messages. No one responded to his yelling, knocking, and calling, but it was heard that the phone was inside the apartment. Sam then went to the first floor of the building to the security guard to ask for help. Samuel explained the situation to him and asked if it was possible to open the front door, to which the guard replied that this was beyond his authority and that he could not leave his post by instruction. Then Sam went back up to his floor and decided to act on his own. He slammed his shoulder into the door, and the first time he did it, he managed to break the latch. It was quiet inside. Ellen's call was never answered, and when he entered the kitchen, he saw a gruesome sight. His fiancée was sitting on the floor, leaning back against the cabinet door, her body slashed with a knife and her clothes stained with blood. Sam immediately started calling emergency services, describing the situation, and when asked to check if the girl had a pulse, he acted strangely, asking several times if he really needed to do that. Then there was silence, and afterward Sam suddenly stated that there was a knife sticking out in his fiancée's chest, which, allegedly, he had not noticed before. He also added that Ellen was obviously already dead. The police officers who arrived on the call were quite surprised.
and noted that they had never seen such a thing in their many years of practice. The door was indeed locked from the inside with a latch, which Sam had subsequently knocked off with his shoulder. There were no signs of forced entry or the presence of intruders in the room. Nothing had been stolen from the apartment. All valuables and money were still there. Nothing had been searched or touched. But the most interesting thing began when the body of the dead girl was examined. No signs of struggle or attempts to defend herself were found, as if everything happened suddenly and the victim simply did not have time to react. On her body counted about 24 stab wounds of varying depth, and the final blow came to the heart, and it took Ellen's life. We will return to the blatant negligence with which the crime scene and the body of the deceased were examined a little later. This negligence allowed a lot of evidence to be missed and left a possible perpetrator at large. But even more strange was the behavior of the police, who even before the medical examination thought that Ellen had done this to herself: panic attacks, visits to a psychologist, and prescription drugs. In favor of the version of voluntary departure from life was the fact that Ellen, since some time, began to suffer from anxiety disorder and panic attacks arising on its background. The situation was so serious that Ellen even sought help from a psychologist. Close, she tried not to complain, so as not to worry them, and relatives in turn associated changes in Ellen's behavior with stress and excitement before the wedding. However, the specialist who worked with Ellen prescribed her 2 medications, which she took regularly to combat her anxiety. As the psychologist himself would later report, neither of these drugs, neither together nor separately, could in any way aggravate Ellen's mental state and cause thoughts of death. The specialist also noted that despite her anxiety, the patient never had such thoughts. In addition, Ellen's friends and colleagues noticed that after she and Sam started living together, her behavior began to change. In addition to becoming anxious and restless, Ellen almost stopped making any decisions on her own. In every situation, Ellen would say that she needed to discuss it with her fiancé, that she couldn't give an answer without consulting him. Similar oddities noticed, and parents of the deceased, but every time her daughter tried to complain to them about her difficult emotional state, she added that Sam had nothing to do with it. And 3 weeks before the tragedy, Ellen told her mother that she wanted to quit school, drop everything, and return to her parents' house. Her mother was very surprised at her daughter's words, but assured her that she could return home at any time, and her parents would accept her without question. However, Ellen never brought up the subject again. Later, it was hypothesized that after the couple moved in together, Sam began to show violence towards his fiancée, and she was scared, afraid to tell anyone about it. The psychologist Ellen consulted did not confirm or deny this version, but noted that Ellen had difficulty articulating and expressing what she was experiencing and what was bothering her. It was as if she wanted to share something important, but the fear was stronger than that. Oddities and inconsistencies in the case. This unusual case from the very beginning raised a lot of questions, but most interestingly, no one even tried to find answers to them. The carelessness with which the examination of the crime scene and the body was conducted, as well as the expertise, is simply astounding. Many circumstances, facts, and evidence were simply ignored and irretrievably lost, and without them it was impossible to restore the full picture of the incident. To begin with, on the hands of the victim, was not found typical for self-defense injuries, which means that the girl was not trying to defend herself. But at the same time, on her body revealed numerous hematomas, which, judging by the degree of healing she received several weeks ago. The fiancé explained that these are most likely the consequences from playing team sports. However, Ellen's parents assured that their daughter had not visited gyms and playgrounds for a very long time because of the workload at work, as well as active preparations for the wedding. No suicide message was found. Ellen looked like a victim of a brutal massacre, but despite this, almost immediately a version of voluntary departure from life was voiced. Moreover, there were food, spices, and a cutting board on the table in the kitchen. So, according to the logic of the investigators, Ellen started to cook dinner, but suddenly changed her mind and decided to cut herself to death with a knife. Further, as I have already noted, on the body of the victim counted 24 penetrating wounds of varying depth, and forensic examinations showed that 10 of them were inflicted from the back, So if the girl was attacked from behind, and some of them were serious enough, and if they did not kill Ellen immediately, then certainly deprived her of the ability to move and resist. It is simply impossible to inflict such injuries on oneself, and then to stick a knife into one's heart to the hilt. And this caused medical experts to doubt the originally announced cause of death. However, despite this conclusion, the investigation continued to insist on the previous version and refused to initiate criminal proceedings. The main argument was the absence of traces of strangers in the apartment, as well as the absence of signs of self-defense. By the way, there were also some doubts about the possibility of penetration into the apartment, because the latch on the inner part of the door was also very peculiar. It could be closed from the outside, but not completely. If the latch had been closed from the inside all the way, it would have been impossible to break it out with a single blow of the shoulder without damaging the doorway. But, judging by the nature of the damage, it was only partially closed, and it could have been done from outside the door. Although the victim's spouse or partner is usually the prime suspect in such cases, Sam has always remained above suspicion. No charges were brought against him, and it was only on the day of the incident that he was interviewed at the station in the presence of his uncle, who, as already mentioned, was a well-known and influential lawyer. Moreover, the whole picture and sequence of events of that day was reconstructed only according to the words of Sam Goldberg, who at times was confused in his own testimony, but wrote everything off as stress. Neighbors confirmed only that they heard the knocking and screaming of a guy who could not get into the apartment and called his fiancée, but that's all. Sam further claimed during his testimony that he went to the security guard for help, and the guard went upstairs with him and saw him kicking down the door. But the guard denied this information, saying that he had not left his post. Strangely enough, but the investigation did not return to this issue, considering this detail irrelevant. A recording from only one surveillance camera leading to the gym was also checked. It shows Sam walking towards the gym and then walking back. But in the interval between these two events, he could well have gone out through another passage and then returned to the gym in the same way. However, his alibi was not checked, and possible witnesses who could confirm that he had been working out or deny it were not even looked for. Sam did not call the police until an hour later, after he found the door locked and his fiancée unresponsive to knocking and shouting. In addition, the officer who took the call noted that Sam was acting strangely. Despite the fact that he was screaming and wailing, the specialist thought that it was a feigned panic because Samuel was calm enough to answer questions and his voice was not shaking. When he was asked to start resuscitative measures, he first doubted the need to do so, then quieted down, and then, and after all, reported about a knife sticking out of his girlfriend's chest, which earlier he allegedly did not notice. It is noteworthy that before calling the police, the guy called his parents and his lawyer uncle, who arrived at the apartment before the police. To the station to testify, as already mentioned, Sam also went together with his uncle. In addition, the next day Sam went back to the sealed apartment with the same uncle to get some personal belongings and took out all of Ellen's gadgets. They took 2 laptops, a phone, and a tablet of the deceased. When the investigation suddenly decided to check these devices a few days later, it turned out that the search queries included topics related to voluntary demise. The police officers who arrived at the scene made only a cursory examination of the scene and concluded that Ellen had taken her own life. Subsequently, despite the emergence of new details, they refused to change their verdict. The order of the wounds could not be established, but it is certain that the final blow was a blow to the heart. The medical examiner who conducted the autopsy found all this very strange, and he decided to conduct his own additional investigation, sending a sample of the spine of the deceased to a highly specialized specialist who could give a conclusion regarding the integrity of the spinal cord. If the spinal cord was damaged, then Ellen would be paralyzed and unable to stab herself in the heart. But soon the expert miraculously changed his mind and abandoned his investigation, stating that according to his report, the spinal cord had not been damaged. However, the conclusion itself was never attached to the case materials. It also didn't bother anyone that with such numerous and extensive wounds on Ellen's body, there was very little blood around, which could indicate that someone had wiped it off. but no one even bothered to look for possible washed-away marks. The luminol used in such cases was simply ignored. The trash cans in the apartment were also not examined, and if there was any evidence in them, they were lost forever. The unhappy parents were informed of the death of their only daughter by the Goldberg family, for they were the first on the scene. Ellen's family lived in another town, a couple hundred miles away from their daughter, but they arrived as quickly as they could. Santa and George couldn't believe what was happening and flatly denied that Ellen could have taken her own life. But the grief-stricken parents were never given a clear answer to the question of what happened that night with their daughter, only a dry conclusion and refusal to initiate criminal proceedings. Then the Greenbergs decided to conduct their own investigation with the involvement of independent specialists. Soon they were contacted by a private detective who offered his help completely free of charge because he himself wanted to understand this confusing case. The detective studied the materials and came to the conclusion that Ellen's body was moved after her death. This was evidenced by a dried blood trickle from her nose toward her ear. But Ellen was found in a sitting position, so the blood couldn't have traveled that way. He also found smeared stains on the floor, very similar to drag marks. In addition, after a second one, the guard remembered that Sam, who had asked for help, was wearing a tracksuit and said he had come back from the gym, but he was wearing boots. He did not have a bag with a change of shoes with him. But despite the new evidence and witness testimony, the parents of the deceased were again denied a criminal case or further investigation. The Greenbergs were even denied case files, including a recording of Sam's phone call to the police, as well as surveillance footage showing the time he walked toward the gym and then returned from there. 4 years later, a new young officer has joined the county's homicide unit, taking a position as an assistant prosecutor. He had heard about the unsolved, strange case while he was still studying at the university, and now he decided to get materials from the archives and get to the truth. His attention was drawn to the injury to the back of the head, which could be the first to indicate that Ellen had been attacked from behind when she hadn't expected it. Also of interest to him was the note that there was no spinal cord injury, but there was no official document to prove it. All of the ADA's attempts to find any report regarding the spinal injuries were unsuccessful. It was allegedly lost somewhere in the archives. Then he made an official request to the Center of Forensic Medical Examination to get a duplicate of the document. And then it turned out that no one had ever given such a conclusion, and the body was not examined for spinal cord injuries. At the same time, a fragment of the spine had somehow miraculously been preserved and could be re-examined. An independent specialist was brought in and determined that the spinal cord had been damaged in several places at once, so that Ellen could not have inflicted further injuries on herself. The resulting materials were passed to the police, but there, after reviewing them, again refused to initiate criminal proceedings. In 2018, the coroner gave an official conclusion, which stated that all 20 wounds the deceased had inflicted on herself, and there can be no doubt about it. New investigation. Once again, at a stalemate of justice, the grief-stricken parents hired a new attorney with whom they recollected all the documents, previously unrecorded evidence, facts, and witness statements. In 2019, they filed a new lawsuit against the coroner and experts who had improperly done their jobs and effectively collapsed the case. The following spring, the lawsuit was heard and settled, but trials never began due to the pandemic raging around the world. It was expected that the case would be reclassified, but due to the negligence of the police and medical examiners, as well as the resulting confusion, crucial evidence was lost and irretrievably lost. The parents of the dead girl even created a page in the social network dedicated to the progress of the investigation, where they share official materials, new details, and versions. Family, friends, and colleagues of Ellen insist that she could not take her own life, and even do it in such a heinous way. Ellen, in principle, did not tolerate the sight of blood. It made her sick, and she also had a low pain threshold, because of which she has never done tattoos or piercings. In the summer of 2022, the case was dismissed again, but the Greenbergs got it transferred to the district attorney's office, where a new prosecutor took over. The investigation began again, 11 years after those terrible events, but to this day the investigation has never been finalized. How did Sam's fate turn out?
For the first year after the tragedy, Samuel tried to keep in touch with his estranged father-in-law and mother-in-law. However, he did not take any part in the investigations initiated by them. He flatly refused to communicate with the police, and it seemed that he was not interested in the case. He himself adhered to the official version that his fiancée himself inflicted fatal injuries. Goldberg soon found solace with another girl, and just a year later married her. Together with his wife, he moved to another state and stopped contact with the Greenberg family. Now he and his wife are raising 2 children together, and about the dead ex-fiancée, Sam tries not to remember. What do you guys think? Is Sam responsible for Ellen's death?
Who organized a bloodbath in a quiet town? Almost any crime in a small, quiet town where everyone knows each other becomes a high-profile event that will be discussed for a long time. But if it is a brutal crime against an entire family, which has never happened before in these parts, then such stories very quickly grow all sorts of rumors, speculation, fictional gruesome details, and eventually turn into a real urban legend. In the fall of 2010, the small Australian town of Kapunda, with a population of only 3,000 people, located on the Light River, near the Barossa Valley in South Australia, was shaken by the horrific news of the massacre of an entire family. Local law enforcers had never encountered anything like this before, and therefore found themselves in a state of confusion. Rumors immediately spread around the city. Everyone retold the story in their own way, so that the police even had to partially classify the case so as not to leak information and not to sow more panic. The dead family was well known and respected in the city. They had no enemies and ill-wishers, as it seemed to everyone at that time, and there was no motive for the crime at first glance either. What happened looked like a senseless bloodbath, and detectives even suggested that it was the work of some madman or maniac. It is noteworthy that the real culprit was not even initially included in the number of suspects, and probably would have been able to get away with it if he had not accidentally given himself away. The story of the Rowe family. The head of the family, Andrew Rowe, was a native of England, where he was born in 1965. At the age of 3, he and his parents emigrated to Australia, where they decided to stay forever. The family settled in the suburbs of Adelaide, where the boy went to school. He from an early age was sociable, had a great sense of humor, and had a lot of friends, and also loved fishing with his father. After graduating from high school while studying in the capital of South Australia, Adelaide, a young man met the same cheerful girl named Rose, who was only a year younger than him. Between students quickly began a romantic relationship, and in 1985, they married, playing a modest wedding, which was attended only by their closest people. In 1987, the couple had their first child together, a boy, whom the happy young parents named Christopher, and in 1994 their daughter Chantel was born. The family settled in a quiet and cozy town, Kapunda, where they opened their own small business, founding a company that provided professional carpet cleaning services. Their business quickly took off, and the business brought in a good income, allowing the Rowe to do nothing to deny themselves. The children attended one of the local schools, where they studied well, and in high school began to work part-time, striving for self-sufficiency and financial independence. The eldest son was interested in music and practiced guitar, while the youngest daughter painted well, attended a dance studio, and played on the school basketball team. Chantel was described as a very kind, sympathetic girl, always ready to come to the aid of those who were in trouble. She dreamed of getting a law degree and becoming a lawyer, and her brother decided to connect his fate with programming and computer technologies. The children were very close to their parents, and in general their family was friendly, strong, and happy. In the summer of 2010, 23-year-old Christopher moved out of his parents' home and began living with his girlfriend in the same city, just a few blocks away from his family. And in late September of the same year, Chantel got a part-time job at a roadside cafe as a waitress. It was inconvenient for her to get to the workplace, so her father or brother drove her there. Since the girl was already 16 years old, she dreamed of passing her driver's license as soon as possible to drive a car, but these dreams, alas, were not destined to come true. On November 4th, 2010, Christopher, together with his girlfriend, went on vacation to Brisbane, and soon after returning, young people planned to play a wedding. But on the 8th, after the young man was unable to reach any of his family members, he became very concerned. Chris called his father's office, and after learning that he did not go to work for an unknown reason and did not answer the phone, he realized that something bad had happened. So he called his friend and asked him to go to their house to see if everything was okay. A brutal massacre of a family. On November 8th, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a patrol car pulled up to the Rowe family home. It is worth noting that at the time, the small-town police station had only 2 people working, and when they realized that they were dealing with a brutal triple crime, they immediately requested help from the administrative center. The picture of the crime was so shocking that even the experienced detectives who came from Adelaide said they had never encountered anything like it. The house inside looked like the set of a horror movie. There was blood everywhere, on the floor, walls, furniture, curtains, and even the ceiling. The breathless and badly disfigured bodies of 45-year-old Andrew and 44-year-old Rose lay in the kitchen, while Chantel's torn body lay on the bed in her room. All members of the family had suffered dozens of penetrating stab wounds and had died long before police and paramedics arrived. Almost immediately, suspicions arose that the crime was of a personal nature because nothing was missing from the house, nothing was searched, and valuable things, phones, laptop, expensive camera, and even money were lying in prominent places. It was also suggested that the killer was not alone, because it is not easy to cope with 3 adults. Either it was a tall, sturdy, and physically strong man. The detectives noticed that in some places the footprints had been ineptly washed and wiped, which led them to conclude that the perpetrator had attempted to hide the evidence, but soon gave up and abandoned the idea. There were also clear, bloody shoe prints on the floor, heading towards the door, but suddenly breaking off, which could indicate that the perpetrator had taken off his shoes and left in socks. Another curious point is that there were no signs of forced entry. This could indicate that the victims either knew their perpetrator and let him into the house themselves, or he got in by some other means. The family, by all accounts, had no enemies or ill-wishers, and no one could even guess who and why the parents and daughter had been so brutally murdered. Several clear fingerprints were found on the door in the room of the murdered girl, but checking them against the police database yielded nothing. The person who left them had never previously come to the attention of law enforcers. He either did not commit offenses or went unpunished. The house was cordoned off as a crime scene, and the area was fenced off from prying eyes, as well as from the press representatives who arrived here. Almost immediately, it was decided not to disclose details and not to spread the word about the investigation, so as not to scare the criminal and not let him lie low or escape. Nevertheless, rumors about the maniac quickly spread through the city. People became afraid to go out in the street at night and locked their houses with all the locks and bolts. First suspects. As wild as it may sound, the first suspect was the only surviving family member, Christopher. At the time of the tragedy, he was in Queensland, where he was vacationing with his fiancée in Moreton Bay on the Pacific coast. He was the first to sound the alarm when he discovered that his loved ones were out of contact, and took the first flight home when he learned the shocking news, but his alibi and fingerprints were checked first. However, he was immediately ruled out as a suspect, as he was indeed on the other side of the continent at the time of the crime. A curious fact was that the young girl, the perpetrator after the massacre, changed into clean clothes and laid on the bed. At the same time, there were bloody drag marks near the bed, which indicated that Chantel probably tried to hide from her executioner under the bed, but he pulled her out of there. In addition, forensic experts soon determined that she had been abused before her death. As noted earlier, it looked like the crime was very personal, and the perpetrator clearly had a grudge against the victims, hence such senseless cruelty. The head of the family received 3 dozen stab wounds, and his wife was stabbed 50 times all over her body. And judging by the traces, she was attacked twice. But after the first attack, she managed to survive, and she even tried to call for help. On the body of the girl, forensic experts counted 33 stab wounds. In addition, she was abused. The police immediately began to find out whether the deceased was in a relationship, whether she was dating someone, and whether she had obsessive fans. It soon became known that the girl had been dating a guy named Dylan for about a year, with whom they went to the same school. The young man was also 16 years old, and the detectives doubted that such a brutal crime could have been committed by this young guy. Nevertheless, they needed to talk to him, check his alibi, and get his opinion as to who might have wanted to harm his girlfriend and her loved ones. Dylan willingly agreed to cooperate with the police and told them everything he knew. According to him, he and Chantel had a wonderful relationship. They loved each other and were going to get married as soon as they became adults. The death of his beloved girl was a huge shock for him, and he simply did not know how to live on. At the time of the massacre of the Rowe family, the guy was in a neighboring city on the anniversary of his grandfather, and his alibi could confirm dozens of people. The young man has also been ruled out as a suspect, searching for evidence and witnesses, so the police had fingerprints of the criminal, as well as his seminal fluid found on the body of the deceased Chantel, from which they managed to extract DNA, but it also did not appear in the police database. Notably, the family was massacred with carving knives that the perpetrator removed from a stand in their own kitchen. This could indicate that the crime was not planned in advance and could have been spontaneous. The murder weapons themselves could not be found at the scene, so the murderer took them with him when he left. Experts determined that the victims were killed between midnight and 2 a.m. One of Rowe's neighbors admitted that around 1 a.m. he heard Rose call for help twice, and then there was a thud, as if something heavy had fallen, and then everything went quiet. He thought it was strange, but he did not call the police, deciding that it was just a simple domestic quarrel between the couple, and he should not interfere in their family affairs. No strangers were seen near their house that evening. Police officers were carefully combing the area around the house looking for evidence or instruments of crime. It was also decided to reach out to the residents of the town through the media and encourage them to share any information that could help the investigation move forward in the case. But this approach rather made the detectives' job more difficult. Almost immediately, the police began to receive dozens of calls from concerned people who wanted to help, and all the information received had to be verified. Callers reported suspicious people, cars, tried to connect what happened with a gang of bikers, with drug dealers, and even reported suspicious posts on social networks found in the profiles of local residents. However, all the incoming information did not help law enforcement officers. 2 days before the tragedy, among the things in the house was found an expensive camera that belonged to the dead girl. As it turned out, Chantel was fond of photography, and detectives assumed that there may be pictures that would help the investigation. There were indeed many photos on the memory card, but the last ones interested the police most of all. It turned out that 2 days before the tragedy, on November 6th, in the house of Rowe was a friendly party, which was organized by Chantel. Her parents that day left with a sleepover to relatives, and she decided to take advantage of their absence. But it should be noted that it wasn't some kind of party with alcohol or something worse, but quite decent and quiet, sitting over watching movies and cooking dinner on the barbecue. Chantel had only invited her boyfriend and 3 of her best friends with their other halves, so there were only 8 people in the house. That evening, the hostess of the house took a lot of pictures that captured their good time. Some of the photos of the guests present that same evening published on their pages in social networks, noting friends there. All the friends stayed the night at the house Rowe, and returned in the morning. Andrew and Rose even cooked breakfast for the guests, having a sit-down in the backyard. Detectives decided that it was necessary to interview all the people who were present at that party, to find out whether the girl had enemies, envious or stalkers, as well as to take everyone's fingerprints to compare with the samples found on the door of the room of the deceased. Chantel's friends still couldn't believe what had happened. They tried their best to help the investigation and showed up at the station to testify at the first call. The boys provided their fingerprints and DNA samples, but they did not match those found at the crime scene. They also allowed access to their social media pages and phones, and they also detailed all the events that took place at what turned out to be the last party. Dylan recalled that on Sunday, his girlfriend complained that she was not feeling well and probably had a cold. In the evening, she had developed a fever and realized that she couldn't go to work the next day, so she had called her boss and warned him about it. The next morning, around 5 o'clock, the guy texted her and asked how she was feeling. He saw the message light up as read, but Chantel never responded. The guy did not know that at that time his beloved and her parents were already dead, and the message was read by the criminal. Moreover, the police found out that the criminal even tried to write a reply text message, but since Chantel forgot to recharge her account, the message never went away. Nevertheless, the perpetrator tried to create the illusion that young Ro was still alive. Unexpected suspect. Dylan and several close friends of the deceased helped police officers compile a list of all the people in Chantel's entourage with whom she had been in contact. Law enforcement began working their way down that list, talking to and checking out everyone listed there. After about a week, they reached a certain 18-year-old young man named Jason Downey. He had previously attended the same high school as the deceased and her boyfriend, but had graduated last year and was now working at a local auto repair shop. Initially, Jason didn't raise any suspicions at all. He was of average height, very thin, even skinny, and looked completely harmless. They planned to just interrogate him and let him go, but the young man began to behave strangely. Instead of answering the standard questions asked, he started complaining that Chantel didn't invite him to her party because everyone there was in pairs, and he didn't have a girlfriend. And afterward, he claimed that he had an alibi for the night of the crime, although no one had even asked him about it. The behavior of the guy seemed very suspicious to the law enforcers, and therefore it was decided to check him to the fullest extent, including fingerprinting and taking a DNA sample. Hearing about this, Downey did not show any excitement or concern and simply agreed to undergo all the necessary procedures. At this point, the police again doubted his guilt, but still decided to follow through with the test. When the expert took the guy's fingerprints, he noticed relatively fresh, deep cuts on his palms. Jason explained that he had hurt himself on the job at the machine shop, but all the cuts looked smooth, as if they had been made with a thin, sharp tool. The test results showed that it was Downey's prints that were found on the dead woman's bedroom door. For the full picture, all we had to do was wait for the DNA test results, which were due in 2 days. In the meantime, they decided to talk to the guy again and ask him how his fingerprints ended up in the house of the deceased if he had not been present at the party the night before. The suspect again looked perfectly calm and explained that he had visited Ro's house with Dylan about a month and a half ago and had probably left fingerprints there. But this version did not correspond to reality because the prints were fresh and clear. They were not dusty. They were not smudged or rubbed, which would have happened to them over such a long period of time. And on November 16, 2010, the DNA results came back from the lab, dispelling any last doubts. It was Jason who had abused the girl that night and taken her life as well as that of her parents. But why would he do that to her? And where did this scrawny young man get his strength and rage? He was arrested the same day, and now the detectives had to find out what moved this man and what was the motive for such a brutal massacre of the family. Who is Jason Downey? Jason Downey was born in September 1992 in the Scottish town of Kilmarnock, where he spent his childhood and early adolescence. He was the youngest of 2 children in the family and was raised with his own older brother, Jamie. His parents divorced when the boy was only 8 months old, and from then on he was raised by his mother, Lorraine. His father soon remarried, and the brothers had a half-sister, Judy, with whom, however, they practically did not communicate. When Jason was 13 years old, they emigrated with his mother and brother to Australia and settled in the town of Kapunda. In the new place, the woman married for the second time to a local resident, whom she had previously met through the internet. The boy, who grew up in a big city, did not like it here at all. He literally hated provincial life. and dreamed of getting out of here. Jason had almost no friends at school. He was considered strange, and they talked to him more out of pity. He was overly talkative, self-assured, and constantly lied, telling everyone what a talented athlete he was, how popular he was, and how many admirers he had. In reality, girls ignored him. No one wanted to get involved with this odd and ugly young man. Dylan and Jason played on the same basketball team, and Dylan felt sorry for Jason because almost no one wanted to be friends with him. He started inviting him to various friendly gatherings and even introduced him to his girlfriend Chantel, which turned out to be a fatal mistake. Chantel also communicated with Downey out of politeness and pity because he was a friend of her boyfriend, and she also a couple of times stood up for him in front of other teenagers who tried to insult him. However, her desire to help a hurt and hounded boy led Jason to fall madly in love with her. Moreover, he began to think that she has the same feelings for him, but because of Dylan cannot say it openly. Over time, teenage crush transformed into a real obsession, but others did not notice it, as Downey became more and more immersed in his fantasies, in which he was happy with Chantel. The girl never gave him hope or made any ambiguous hints, but only tried to be polite and friendly. She just happened to be the only one who was kind to him, and he mistook it for love. The arrest and the first interrogation. When the last doubts that Jason had committed the triple crime were dispelled, the law enforcers realized that the arrest could not be delayed, but they did not know how best to do it because they were afraid that the guy might not have done something. Everyone knew exactly what he was capable of, so they decided to lure him to the station under a harmless pretext. As soon as the suspect arrived, handcuffs were snapped on his wrists. Surprisingly, the guy showed no emotion at all. He wasn't surprised, scared, or angry. He was completely calm. Downey denied all the accusations and tried his best to get out of it. He insisted that he left his fingerprints when he visited the house a month and a half ago. And when the guy was asked how his DNA ended up on the body and inside the deceased, he said that at the same time during his visit, they had consensual intimacy. Of course, this could not be true, because seminal fluid could not have remained on the body for so long, neither inside nor outside. As for the suspect's alibi, he stated that he had an argument with his mother and stepfather in the evening, after which he went to sleep in the car. The parents confirmed the fact of the quarrel, but no one knew where Jason went afterward. The police also managed to find out that in the evening, November 7th, he called Dylan, from whom he learned that Chantel was sick and would stay home on Monday. Apparently, it was after this conversation that he decided to go to Rose's house. Around the same time, police were able to locate a pair of shoes discarded in a deserted area with traces of blood on them. The sole prints matched the marks at the crime scene. The shoes showed traces of blood from all three victims, and inside were Downey's own sweat, reconstructing the timeline of events. When Jason realized that the evidence against him is too much and it is useless to defend himself, he decided to confess to the murder and agreed to cooperate with the investigation in order to avoid the most severe punishment. However, he tried to minimize his guilt in every possible way. He even promised to show the place where he threw the crime tools, but there were no knives there. Most likely the guy was just lying. That evening he really quarreled with his mother and stepfather, after which he left home, intending to spend the night in the car. However, after a phone conversation with Dylan, Jason became obsessed with seeing Chantel. Initially, he planned to just drive up to her house and stare blankly through the windows, as he had done so many times before, but it was dark indoors. Then the guy drove the car to the end of the street, returned back on foot, and sneaked into the house through a small window in the bathroom, which the owners left open. As he was very thin, he succeeded without difficulty. He sat in the bathroom for about half an hour, listening to the sounds to make sure everyone had gone to bed. The suspect then headed to Chantel's bedroom to, he said, confess his feelings to her. But why he took the knife from the kitchen with him if he was going to confess his love, the guy could not explain. According to the police, Jason initially planned to abuse the object of his lust by threatening her with a knife, but she naturally resisted. During the attack, he wounded her several times, and the victim tried to hide from her tormentor under the bed. Her parents woke up from the noise, but they did not have time to get to their daughter's room as the perpetrator jumped out in front of them. The guy was literally mad at the sight of blood. He attacked Andrew, quickly stabbing him in the neck and chest area. Then he knocked Rose to the ground and stabbed her 12 times until the woman lost consciousness. Downey then returned to Chantel's room, pulled her out from under the bed, took advantage of her, and then finished her off with the knife in cold blood. Why he changed his victim into clean clothes, he was never able to explain. In the meantime, the miraculously surviving woman managed to get to the back door and even managed to call for help twice before the perpetrator caught up with her and finished her off with a second knife, which he snatched from the same stand. After massacring the family, the guy made an attempt to clean up the house, but quickly abandoned the idea because there was too much blood. He realized that he had made a mess, so he took off his bloody shoes and left the scene in just his socks. He took the knives with him and disposed of them in such a way that they were never found. Trial and sentencing. Jason's trial began only in the fall of 2011, almost a year after his crime. At the trial, the guy behaved absolutely calmly, did not express any emotions, but constantly changed his testimony. He claimed that he was in shock, that he did not remember killing the Rowe family, and kept repeating that he loved Chantel and did not want to hurt her. It is noteworthy that after the massacre, he took with him the victim's pendant, which was later found in his room during a search, and the chain from the pendant was in the glove compartment of his car. At trial, he recounted again that Chantel had not invited him to a party she had thrown at her house the night before because he did not have a date. Allegedly, he was very upset that he had been ignored and noted that the tragedy might not have happened if Chantel had called him then. The defendant testified with a completely impartial face, and in a phone conversation he told his brother that he pleaded guilty to avoid a life sentence. That is, Jason was not remorseful at all, but only wanted to receive a lighter sentence. However, he managed to get his way. On April 19, 2012, Downey was found guilty of a triple crime. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of qualifying for parole after 35 years. During the announcement of the sentence, not a single muscle on his face did not tremble. He remained as calm and impartial as if it was not about him, but about someone else. If he had not pleaded guilty, he would have been eligible for release after 45 years. Christopher Rowe considered the punishment just, although he noted that no court could take away his pain and bring his family back to life. In memory of his parents and sister, he made tattoos with their names. Finally, I would like to add that Christopher is currently married, and together with his wife, they are raising their son, Kobe. Today, we venture into Cortland, a city of contrasts, where the grim realities of gang violence and the illegal trade of prohibited substances are offset by the upstanding native residents. Despite its status as a small town, Cortland and the surrounding Panola County, with a population of 34,000, face their share of criminal activity and dangerous gangs. Regular shootouts and arrests of those involved in illegal trade are commonplace. This negative environment played a pivotal role in our story. On December 6, 2014, at 20:09, emergency services received a report of a vehicle fire on a rural road. The first firefighters to arrive at the scene encountered a blazing Kia Rio and immediately began extinguishing the flames. Inside the car was a hellish scene, with black smoke billowing upwards rapidly. As the rescuers doused the vehicle with foam, they accidentally noticed a dark figure slowly emerging from the nearby underbrush. The silhouette resembled either a young woman or a child. The victim was severely burned and looked like a living corpse. As the figure approached, the firefighters saw it was a young woman, dressed only in her underwear, covered in burns from head to toe. She approached them and asked for help. The unfortunate woman was completely burned. Her clothes had been incinerated, her skin was melting and slowly dripping downwards, and her entire body was bleeding. Her hair had turned into a charred lump of ash. Her face was black with soot. A rescuer wrapped her blistered body in a blanket and laid her on the ground. As they waited for the emergency medical services crew, the firefighters did not leave her side. The young woman, barely moving her lips, tried to utter individual words, which were indiscernible to those around. Considering her condition, she could not speak clearly, but several emergency responders still managed to hear the names Eric or Derek when she was asked who had attacked her. She was airlifted from a small rural town to a hospital in Memphis. However, after sustaining about 93% burns to her body, the young woman passed away 4 hours later. The victim was 19-year-old local resident Jessica Lane Chambers. Jessica grew up in Cortland, living with her mother across the street from her grandmother, while her father and stepmother lived further down the street. She was a petite and fragile young woman, but possessed a steely character. She was raised in a tumultuous family environment, much like many of her friends, relatives, and neighbors. Her father had pleaded guilty to manufacturing methamphetamine and had been arrested for driving under the influence in the early 2000s. In 2006, her 28-year-old neighbor was shot several times in his yard. Growing up in such a negative environment, Jessica did not turn out to be the quiet choir girl. She smoked, quarreled with her parents, had unstable relationships with boyfriends who had legal troubles, and as her family knew, sometimes acted out violently during disputes. Jessica's behavior became more pronounced at 17, following the death of her older brother Alan in a car accident in 2012. She moved out of her mother's home for several months after her mother disapproved of Jessica's new boyfriend. Her childhood was challenging. Her father spent some time in prison, but by 2014, he had been released and was working as a mechanic at the local sheriff's department. Jessica was not afraid to break the law. Occasionally, she sold illegal substances and was affiliated with local gangs. Nevertheless, the sweet and smiling Jessica was respected and liked by almost everyone she knew, making the shocking manner of her demise all the more mysterious. Rumors of a burning car and a deliberate fire-setting incident quickly spread throughout her small hometown. Jessica's father's position in the sheriff's department allowed him to be swiftly informed about the nearby car fire and the incident involving his daughter. Upon hearing the news, his wife ran down the street to tell Jessica's mother about the tragic event.
They reached the hospital while Jessica was still alive. The tragic death of the young woman captured the nation's attention. Hundreds attended Jessica's funeral on December 13th, which was a memorial organized in honor of a joyful teenager, a former student, cheerleader, and a girl who dreamed of rising above her circumstances. A prolonged investigation into this high-profile case soon followed, stirring public interest. The FBI, ATF, and U.S. Marshals were called in to assist with the local investigation. The initial theory was that the fire resulted from a car accident. However, this was quickly ruled out as no signs of emergency braking or any other obstacles were found at the scene. An examination of the burned vehicle also showed no signs of impact or damage to the body. Thus, the theory was not supported. The primary theory then became arson. But at the time of the incident, the police had very few leads, and the lack of evidence prolonged the investigative process. Investigators questioned nearly everyone who might have been in contact with Jessica in the last days of her life. They even explored the possibility that her boyfriend, who was in prison at the time of the arson, might have ordered her demise. However, this theory was dismissed as he had been living in Iowa since their breakup. Ali Al-Sinai, the owner of a gas station, also came under suspicion. He was one of the last people to see Jessica alive. Ali gave his statement and was released. There was a theory that Jessica had brought trouble upon herself by associating with one of the local gangs. However, the gang members denied their involvement and expressed their condolences to the Chambers family. Many of those called in for questioning had good reasons to lie, even if they didn't know who ended her life. It seemed the investigation was at a standstill. There was neither a suspect nor a motive for such a brutal act. The public pressure on the investigation demanded justice, thereby slowing down the investigative process and repeatedly providing false leads about Jessica's life. Here are some of the theories that were most popular on social media. For instance, locals accused Brian Rudd, Jessica's ex-boyfriend from high school, who might have acted out of jealousy in a moment of intense emotion. Others suggested that Jessica sold someone faulty pills for several $100s, which could have angered a dealer. "This is the most mysterious case I have ever worked on," said District Attorney John Champion, who has been serving in the county for 22 years. He has been working on Jessica's case since December. Together with local detectives, the MBI, FBI, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, and the U.S. Marshals Service. According to Champion, they have interviewed and in some cases re-interviewed over 130 people, including several individuals named Eric and Derek. Yet authorities have not arrested any suspect so far. After some time, investigators managed to reconstruct the last week of Jessica's life, minute by minute, up to her tragic end. On December 5, 2014, after receiving a call on her cell phone, Jessica drove to the M&M Mini-Mart. Following a call from a friend, she purchased $14 worth of gasoline and left in her car at 5:15 p.m. Around 5:45 p.m., she called her mother to say she would return in a little while. Her hair was pulled back in a bun, and she was dressed in camouflage pajama pants. She then made a few more stops, one at an unknown house and another in the nearest town, before arriving at the scene of her tragic end, possibly already accompanied in her car by the person who would end her life. Surveillance cameras also captured a man in a striped shirt refueling at gas can before heading in the same direction as Jessica. However, there were no confirming data about the man's further movements. Cell phone records indicated that she spent about 10-15 minutes near a traffic light on Highway number 6, heading towards Batesville. The subsequent 62 minutes, between 6:30 p.m. and 7:32 p.m., also known as the mystery hour, took time to unravel. At 7:30 p.m., Jessica's phone showed that she reached the location on Heron Road, where her burning car was later found. So, where did Jessica Chambers go and what led to her brutal fate? The investigation moved very slowly. Only in December 2015, in a separate case involving charges of illegal possession of weapons, controlled substances, and counterfeits, 17 suspected gang members were arrested. District Attorney John Champion did not expect any of the gang members to be directly linked to the case of the burning incident. It turned out that during plea negotiations, all gang members were offered the opportunity to assist the investigation. Thus, the gang members pointed to a certain Quentin Tellis. Then, investigators finally learned who Jessica was with an hour before the fire. But in February 2016, authorities announced a pause in the case to conduct the more detailed investigation and establish a motive. The lack of official suspects only deepened the spread of baseless rumors, which circulated on the internet and then throughout the town. This situation attracted online detectives. A Facebook page called Justice for Jessica was created, offering a $50,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and a widespread search for her assailant. Rumors also circulated online that Jessica, who had previously dated African-American men, had been targeted by white supremacists for her involvement in interracial relationships. Conversely, online conspiracy theorists suggested that the culprits were African-American because Jessica was in a gang and was perpetrated in retaliation for trying to leave it. However, none of these theories received official confirmation. The investigation became particularly interested in the figure of Quentin Tellis. After revisiting social media and Jessica's cell phone, they identified whom the young cheerleader had been communicating with in the last hours of her life. During the first interrogation, 29-year-old Quentin Tellis recounted that the meeting, which had been arranged by text message, was the only time they met, and he did not know her well, merely asking for a ride home. However, with more comprehensive information than presenting all the messages, Tellis was arrested on charges of ending Jessica Chambers' life through arson. Text messages reveal that Tellis repeatedly sent Jessica requests of a very intimate nature. On the day of the tragedy, Jessica texted Quentin at 9:02 a.m. to tell him she had just woken up, and he replied a few minutes later that he had as well. At 10:09 a.m., Tellis texted Chambers, "I'm ready," shortly after she stopped at the M&M gas station. She was captured on surveillance footage, leaving the M&M a few minutes later, presumably to pick up Tellis. Afterwards, they picked up one of Jessica's friends. Around 10:49 a.m., Jessica dropped Quentin off. Later, around 2:03 p.m., Tellus began messaging Jessica again, this time explicitly asking for some love. This was the fourth message in 4 days in which he requested intimacy via text. Other deleted texts were recovered, including messages like "I'm excited" and "Come lie with me," which Jessica left unanswered. The passenger seat in Jessica Chambers' burned car was pushed back, a position typical for intimate activities in a car. Prosecutors argued that this was evidence that the two were engaged in, or at least attempting, intimacy that tragic evening. On February 24th, Tellus was charged with ending Jessica's life and arson. It took the investigation considerable time to build the case. The first trial in the Jessica Chambers case began in 2017 in Batesville, Mississippi, about 50 miles south of Memphis. The trial was highly publicized with strict security measures in place. Jurors were sequestered and spectators were screened with metal detectors before entering the courtroom. Prosecutor John Champion warned the jurors that they would see disturbing images of the burned Jessica Chambers and hear testimony from about 35 witnesses. Investigators stated that Jessica met Quentin Tellus around Thanksgiving in November 2014. He was 7 years her senior and had attended the same high school before she enrolled there. In October of that same year, he had been released from prison, where he had served time for burglary. FBI agent Dustin Blount testified during the first trial. He met Jessica through a friend at a gas station in Cortland, Mississippi. They spent a lot of time driving around together on multiple occasions. He went as far as to say that they had been intimate. He stated that they had been in the passenger seat, detailing further that the passenger seat was reclined back and he was sitting in the passenger seat with Jessica Chambers sitting on him. In court, John Champion said, "There was a series of text messages between them, even on the day of her demise, in which he requested intimacy. The front seat in the burned car was adjusted downward as Tellus had described during their previous encounter." Champion claimed that Tellus attempted to end her life by strangulation, then, thinking she was deceased, doused her with gasoline and set her alight. A friend of Jessica, who testified, indicated that the three of them had ridden in Jessica's car the day before the incident. Later, Tellus confessed to investigators that he saw Jessica that night, and they went to a fast food restaurant together. Various friends he claimed to have been with when the fire started could not confirm his alibi. He then appeared on a store surveillance camera several miles away, where he was purchasing a phone card for a friend who lived in Louisiana. Tellus did not testify in his own defense at the trial. A central element of the defense was the fact that several emergency responders at the scene of the tragedy reported hearing Jessica utter the name Eric or Derek. Ultimately, 2 jurors reacted to the fact that Quentin Tellus's name sounded nothing like Eric or Derek. Panola County District Attorney John Champion pointed to text messages in which Tellus repeatedly requested intimacy from Chambers. You will see text messages between them where Quentin is consistently asking Jessica for intimacy, and she is consistently denying him. Champion testified at the first trial. It was proven that there was a series of text messages, even on the day of her death, where he was requesting intimacy from her. Also, FBI agent Dustin Blount shared that during questioning, Tellus admitted to deleting Jessica's contact information and all their text messages from his phone soon after her demise. When asked why, Quentin calmly responded, "I wasn't scared, but once we found out who it was, who had passed there, I just deleted my contact with her, because I didn't want to have a deceased person in my phone, a number in my phone that just wouldn't be used anymore." At the first trial, FBI agent Dustin Blount demonstrated that Tellus and Chambers met through a friend at a gas station in their small hometown of Cortland. They drove around together a lot, many times, said Agent Blount, who recalled interrogating Tellus. He went so far as to say that they had been intimate at some point. Agent Blount, who spoke with Tellus at his home 11 days after Jessica's passing, asked Tellus to describe the intimate encounter and pinpoint where it occurred. Tellus indicated a driveway south of the house he shared with his mother. Back in December 2014, he lived with his mother in a trailer up the road from the convenience store where Jessica Chambers was last seen before the fire. His DNA was found on the woman's keys, and his cell phone records placed him at that location on the night in question. However, Quentin Tellus continued to maintain his innocence. Defense attorney Darla Palmer, in her opening statement, urged the jurors to disregard the cellophone location evidence, which she argued could not prove that Tellus and Chambers were at the same place. Quentin has always maintained his innocence, telling police in the interrogation room, even after being threatened with capital punishment if it went to trial, "I've told the truth. I did not end Jessica's life. I don't have it in my heart to end anyone's life."
His family claims that the police are merely looking for someone to blame in a case that has become a highly charged racial issue since Tellus, who is African American, was arrested for the death of the attractive white cheerleader. Investigators looked for connections to other recent fires in Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama. Jessica was a white woman who dated African American men, and she wasn't the first white woman attacked over interracial relationships, but they say they found no links. "I can't tell you how many different theories we've considered," said Champion. "Typically, law enforcement can quickly identify suspects in a homicide through street informants, interviewing witnesses, but no matter how much we've cooperated with people, listening to testimonies, taking DNA swabs, conducting polygraph tests, we haven't come any closer to an arrest." The first trial in 2017 ended in a mistrial due to confusion related to the jury instructions. They stated that a guilty verdict must be unanimous, but did not explicitly say the same for a not guilty verdict. Officials noted that the jurors apparently decided that since they could not unanimously agree on Tellus's guilt, this implied his innocence. By the time of the retrial in 2018, Quentin Tellus was under investigation in Louisiana for the end of life of student Ming Chen Xiao, as well as for the illegal use of a stolen bank card. In May 2019, he was charged with second-degree murder in connection with Xiao's demise. The second trial was notably challenging. Jurors were shown a photo of Jessica Chambers, which firefighter Cole had taken upon arriving at the scene. Cole shared that the image of Chambers, her lips blackened with soot, haunted her, and she told jurors, "I see this photo I took every morning and every night." A veteran firefighter stated that he had never seen a victim with such severe burns when he found the young woman lying on the ground, barely able to speak, after she had been deliberately set on fire. She was sitting on a blanket. Her hair was singed, soot around her nose and mouth, blisters all over her body. Cole, the Panola County Director of Emergency Operations, told the jurors, "I sat and held her hand. That's all I could do," said firefighter Cole Haley, holding back tears. "I told her, 'Sweetheart, it's going to be okay.' And she replied, 'I'm going to die.' At that moment, I lay down beside her," Haley recounted. "Her skin was hanging from her lips and her nose," testified paramedic Bradley Dixon. "Her eyelashes and eyebrows were gone. The hair on her head was a warm, matted clump." Testimonies at the second hearing also included a woman named Sherry Flowers, who had not appeared at the first trial of Tellus, but told investigators during questioning that she had picked up a hitchhiker on the night Jessica Chambers was tragically ended. Sherry Flowers did not recognize Tellus in court and agreed with the prosecutor that she did not know whom she had picked up. However, she told the court that a man flagged her down and she stopped because she thought it was her cousin. She agreed to give a ride to the man, whom she described as an African-American male, about 20 years old and of slim to medium build. Tellus, who was 5 feet 9 inches tall, was 26 at the time. Initially, Flowers did not reach out to investigators, and when asked why in court, she said, "I couldn't remember and thought it wasn't relevant to the case." Nevertheless, the prosecutors attempted to link this ride to the demise of Jessica Chambers, suggesting it provided Quentin Tellus with the opportunity to leave Jessica's car in order to return and set it on fire.
However, the defense contested the timing, and Flowers admitted that she was unsure of the exact time of the ride, only stating, "I know I picked someone up." The investigator also presented that Jessica Chambers' keys were found in a ditch 2 days after her passing, near the spot where the hitchhiker was picked up. The defense objected to the keys being admitted into evidence, arguing it was impossible to prove where the keys had been at the time. During the retrial, jurors were required to visit the sites involved in the crime and hear additional testimony. The second trial was highly emotional. Witnesses broke down on the stand, and spectators wept as photos of the young woman Jessica Chambers' burned abdomen and face were shown. One of the first responders, cheerfully testifying, embraced the girl's father as he stepped down from the stand. In 2018, the second jury also failed to reach a verdict in the Tellis trial, marking the second jury in 2 years to be deadlocked over whether Quentin Tellis was responsible for setting Jessica and her car on fire. Despite the suspect having been tried twice, no conviction was secured, and the case remains officially unsolved. Nevertheless, online sleuths continue to scour social media for any clue that investigators might have missed, developing their own often outlandish theories about who truly ended Jessica Chambers' life. The demise of Jessica Chambers initially drew significant media attention. Over time, as media interest waned, the story captured the attention of internet detectives worldwide. To this day, one of the most discussed aspects of the Jessica Chambers case is what transpired between her leaving home and her tragic end. According to reports, Jessica left her house at 5 p.m. on the night of the crime, telling her mother she was going to a nearby gas station. Surveillance footage from the gas station shows Chambers there twice. The footage captures Jessica fueling up, then heading toward the store and waving to someone off camera before approaching them. Observers continue to speculate about whom young Jessica was waving at that day. Amateur detectives have tried to crack the case on their own, developing their own theories and sometimes following information that was blatantly false, and at times even harassing the family and friends of Jessica Chambers. These individuals, ranging from conservative bloggers to gluten-free bakers from Montreal, boating enthusiasts from Florida and grocery coupon collectors from North Carolina, claim to seek justice for Jessica above all else. Instead, they have terrorized her once peaceful hometown with their relentless demands for answers to their dubious theories. In the process, they spread rumors that seep into real life, stirring racial tensions, digging up old grudges, and reigniting feuds. For these amateur detectives, Jessica's death is not a mother's tragedy, it's a pastime. Media critics use the term missing white woman syndrome to describe the national obsession with victims who are young, blonde, and white, and Jessica fit all these criteria. A former cheerleader with flaxen hair, weighing just 90 pounds. But those obsessed with Jessica's death are particularly fixated on her tiny hometown. Outsiders can easily track down social media accounts and even phone numbers of Jessica's family members, friends, ex-boyfriends, and sworn enemies, all of whom have reported being contacted by strangers wanting to interrogate them about whether they took the life of the teenager. The police say they still don't know who ended her life and why, leaving the mystery in the hands of online amateur sleuths who may do more harm than good. When does a personal tragedy become a public spectacle? The Justice for Jessica memorial page on Facebook, managed by Jessica's older stepsister, remains popular. It has united many compassionate people from around the world who once heard about the young woman burned alive. People send letters of sympathy, supportive words for the family and friends, and donate books and gifts in Jessica's name. Hanging in Jessica's room is a memorial quilt made of bright pink patches with zebra prints, along with her photo and the dates of her birth and death. The words "secret group" were stitched into the top left square. No one knows what this phrase means, as the quilt, like other gifts, came from around the world. Tragically, Jessica's death did not change the town of Cortland. Everyone knows each other here, and both authorities and locals believe the attack was personal. 29-year-old Quentin Tellis, serving time for a different crime, is not a free man, yet justice for Jessica still has not been achieved. Regrettably, Jessica's mother, Lisa, passed away on October 29, 2021, at the age of 52, without seeing justice served for her daughter. It remains uncertain whether there will be a third trial for the case of the young woman burned alive. The fear of snakes is perhaps the most common phobia on Earth, and it seems understandable. Some of them are lethal, so fearing snakes is just a genetically ingrained instinct of survival in our brains. However, it would be unfair to label snakes solely as predators. They are also amazing creatures with incredible abilities and appearances, capable of evoking a wide range of emotions, but certainly leaving no one indifferent. In our story today, we'll talk about a rare snake that suddenly attacked its owner, ending his life. Ben Renick was just 29 years old when he was found deceased in his renowned snake breeding facility. Benjamin Blue Birch Renick was born in August 1987 in Missouri. He grew up in the countryside alongside his family. Ben had an older brother, Sam, with whom he shared a very close bond. In 1989, the Renick family moved to a picturesque farmhouse. The boys spent a lot of their time outdoors, and it was then that Ben began to take an interest in snakes. A tragic incident in September 1992 triggered a series of unfortunate events. The family was away when a gas leak occurred, leading to an explosion in their beautiful home. The Renicks were forced to move into a trailer. After some time, Ben's mother, Kim, was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. Despite these hardships, the family overcame. They were very close-knit and always supported each other in any situation. Recovering from previous tragedies in 2002, they moved to a new home where a special room was designed for Ben to keep his snakes. In 2009, after a long battle with cancer, Kim passed away. Before her death, she made her sons promise to look after the farm and pass it on to their children. As time went by, Ben's love for snakes knew no bounds, and the young man founded Renick Reptiles, which soon gained recognition. This allowed him to sell snakes worldwide from the United Kingdom to Japan. Breeding snakes became the meaning of his life. He was described as a great breeder who was devoted to his work, caring more about the snakes than the money. The reptile farm bred a multitude of reptilian subspecies, growing and reproducing both the most common species and some of the rarest subspecies on Earth. Ben's reptiles were of immense value. Just a portion of his pie farm collection was valued at over $1 million. However, Ben was lonely and had long dreamed of starting a family. So in 2010 at a party, he met a woman named Lindley. Their relationship progressed rapidly, and within weeks, Ben introduced his girlfriend to his brother Sam and Sam's fiancé Eli. Eli and Lindley had sons from previous relationships, so they quickly found common ground and became friends. Lindley swiftly became part of the Renick family, and they started living together. She assisted Ben on the snake breeding farm. They were in love and lived as a full family even before they made their union official. In March 2012, Lindley gave birth to a daughter, Amelia. Ben was overjoyed to become a father. However, the happy family life once again encountered problems. Frank Renick, Ben's father, encountered significant troubles in his business. Previously, he had engaged in several fraudulent stock transactions to cover medical bills and Kim's treatment. Just a day before the FBI planned to visit the farm, Frank took his own life. Frank's passing halted the investigation. The sons were deeply affected by yet another parental loss, but managed to get through it, coming together and supporting one another once more. Ben inherited the house and farm, while Sam received a sum of money far exceeding the house's value. Each brother had his own family and children, but this never prevented them from living as one big family in their parents' home. They lived together, and Sam, without hesitation, spent his inheritance on repairing the farm. Initially, everything was fine, but soon financial disputes caused a rift between the brothers. After their father's death, Ben focused on his business and his family. He decided to formalize his relationship with Lindley. On April 14, 2014, they married, making Lindley a full-fledged member of the Renick household. Lindley and Ben opened a second business, a spa called Essentia Spa Inc. But the business Lindley managed faced financial difficulties. Ben and Lindley often argued about finances. Lindley worked hard, but not enough to cover the salon's expenses. At the same time, Sam and his wife also faced financial challenges. Ben allowed them to sell some of the furniture in the house. Lindley disapproved, leading to a rift between the families. The relationship was irreparably damaged. Ben decided to improve the family's financial situation by arranging to sell some rare reptiles for a significant sum. However, the deal fell through due to a tragedy that occurred on the farm. On June 8, 2017, Lindley walked into one of the farm's barns. There, on the floor in a pool of blood, laid Ben. Lindley called his brother Sam for help and dialed the emergency number. She reported that she had found her husband unconscious on the ground. During the conversation, Lindley dropped the phone and ran outside. Sam continued the conversation and confirmed that his brother was dead. Sam suggested that a snake might be to blame for what had happened. Montgomery County Sheriff's deputies were called to the snake breeding facility. For the first time in a long while, law enforcement officers were afraid to enter the farm, facing the prospect of encountering over 3,000 snakes and conducting an examination of a man lying in blood, wary of a possible attack from a deadly viper believed to be the assailant. However, when Coroner Dave Colbert arrived and took a closer look, he discovered a shell casing on a shelf at eye level. This was something far more sinister than a venomous snake bite. Shell casings were found near the body, but no weapon was discovered. The assailant had shot Ben multiple times in the back and head. None of the relatives heard shots or saw the attacker. Sam and Lindley were taken to the sheriff's office for questioning. Lindley suggested that Sam might be involved in their husband's death, even citing a motive. Apparently, Ben wanted to sell the house, but Sam was opposed. Sam was asked to undergo a lie detector test, which he passed. The police had no reason to detain Lindley and Sam, so they were released. The investigation into who might have wanted Ben Renick dead began. Various theories were proposed, the first being robbery, but it remained unconfirmed as none of the rare snakes were missing, and all valuable items remained untouched. Just days after the demise of Ben Renick, police interrogated Lindley. They tested her hands and clothing for gunpowder residue, but the results came back negative. Following her husband's funeral, Lindley ceased communications with Sam and Eli. She sold her husband's business, inherited the house, and sought to claim a life insurance payout for Ben worth $1 million. After receiving the insurance money, Lindley planned to sell the Renick family home for $740,000. Sam's family was notified about the eviction. Upon discovering the rapid insurance claim and business sale following her husband's passing, Sam Renick suspected his brother's wife in the tragic event, sharing his suspicions with investigators. Lindley was called in for another interrogation. There, she admitted to having complex relations with Ben and occasionally meeting with a man named Arik. Arik had an alibi, so he was excluded from the list of suspects. Lindley's admissions were startling. It turned out, about 3 years after their marriage was officially registered, she was unfaithful to Ben, with at least 2 different men. Messages between the couple showed that Ben suspected his wife of infidelity, which had indeed strained their relationship lately. On October 5, 2017, the Missouri State Highway Patrol conducted a polygraph test on Lindley, informing her that she had failed. However, without solid evidence linking her to the crime, she was released. Nevertheless, the investigation into Ben Renick's case slowed but did not cease. Later, investigators learned that a month before Ben Renick's passing, Lindley had made her first attempt on his life. She concocted a story of Ben being a cruel tyrant who oppressed her daily and even physically assaulted her. She shared this story with a spa salon co-worker to garner support and assistance. They plotted to end Ben's life by giving him a poisonous protein shake laced with 15 Percocet pills. Unaware, Ben drank it. He fell severely ill during that period but survived, oblivious to the fact that he had been poisoned. Lindley Renick was interrogated by investigators 6 times in total. Further assistance in the investigation came unexpectedly. On January 14, 2020, information from a state prison surfaced, with a witness claiming to have knowledge about Ben Renick's demise. The witness was Brandon Blackwell. He told Missouri State Highway Patrol investigators that Lindley had shot Ben and had conspired with her ex-boyfriend. Brandon mentioned that he had dated Lindley while she was married to Ben. 1.5 years after Ben's death, they had a child together, but by 2019, they had separated. Brandon claimed that Lindley confessed the act to him. She had conspired with her spa salon co-worker, Ashley Shaw, and another ex-boyfriend, Michael Humphrey. Years after Ben's demise, Lindley Renick and her former boyfriend, Michael Humphrey, were arrested for Ben's death. However, following their arrest, Lindley and Humphrey pointed fingers at each other. So who really pulled the trigger? According to Michael's testimony, on the day of the event, he went to the farm with Lindley, who asked him to pose as a buyer. He put on gloves and was supposed to shoot Ben, but couldn't do it. Eventually, Lindley took the gun and shot her husband herself. The investigation into Ben Renick's death continued for 3 long years. On January 16, 2020, arrest warrants were issued for Lindley Renick, Michael Humphrey, and Ashley Shaw. Ashley was offered immunity in exchange for her cooperation, and she testified against her boss. The former spa salon employee shared that Lindley had complained about her husband and convinced her to assist in a plan. She claimed that Ben was constantly belittling, demeaning, and even physically harming her. Fearing divorce would lead to Ben gaining custody of her children, Lindley decided to eliminate him, planning together to poison him with a lethal cocktail. During questioning, Lindley and Michael accused each other of Ben's demise. In October 2021, Michael Humphrey faced trial in Audrain County. His lawyers hoped that revealing the murder weapon would lead to a second-degree murder charge. Despite possessing the gun, no conclusive DNA evidence was found on it. To lessen his sentence, Michael Humphrey also made a deal with the prosecution, disclosing the location of the murder weapon. His cooperation led to a life sentence on a less severe charge of second-degree murder, without defense at the trial. On January 3, 2021, Michael Humphrey was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. The trial against Lindley Renick began on December 6, 2021. She was charged with the shooting and demise of Ben Renick on June 8, 2017, at his snake breeding facility in New Florence. Court documents stated that the plot to end Ben Renick's life originated in Lindley's spa salon. The probable cause statement mentioned that Ben was aware of Lindley's financial troubles and that Lindley feared Ben could take her children away, leading her to fabricate a story of domestic abuse. The first attempt to end Ben Renick involved a protein shake laced with narcotics. Search warrants for Ben and Lindley Renick's Facebook accounts confirmed the protein shake story and Ben's awareness of Lindley's financial issues. The court hearing detailed the events of the day Ben Renick was killed, fully reconstructing the sequence of events through cross-examination. On the day of the incident, Michael Humphrey picked up Lindley from the spa salon, while Shaw sent text messages from Lindley's phone inside the spa to conceal their true location and mislead the investigation. According to court documents, Humphrey intended to end Ben's life, but asked Lindley to do it. After firing shots, Humphrey collected most of the casings, but missed some in his haste. He also disposed of Lindley Renick's clothing after returning to the spa, where Lindley took a shower, which helped avoid detection of gunpowder residue on her hands and clothes on the day of the incident. Defense attorney Catherine Berger asked Lindley Renick to share her personal and family history, education in massage therapy, relationship with ex-boyfriend Michael Humphrey, work history, and the lead-up to her marriage with Ben Renick, portraying the suspect as a victim of domestic violence. However, no evidence of such violence was found, undermining this defense narrative. Michael Humphrey was part of a group that allegedly planned to end Ben Renick's life. Lindley Renick described her relationship with Humphrey as codependent, involving his drug dealing and her addiction. Lindley Renick ended her relationship with Humphrey at the end of 2010. According to previous witness statements, she reconnected with him about a month before Ben Renick's death. Lindley Renick denied the prosecution's allegations related to the supposed plans to end Ben Renick's life, including the alleged failed attempt to poison Ben with a protein shake containing narcotics. The couple was experiencing both financial and marital difficulties. The spa center was failing, and contractual deals for selling snakes had yet to yield financial benefits. In court, Lindley admitted to having extramarital relationships with various men, for which she expressed deep regret. By the time Lindley considered discussing divorce, she was unsure who to turn to, given her father's divorce history and his firm views on divorce and affairs. Wanting someone to support her in her conversation with Ben, she reached out to past boyfriends, leading to a reconnection with Michael Humphrey. During cross-examination by the prosecution, Lindley admitted to willingly participating in her husband's death and intentionally concealing Michael Humphrey's involvement. Due to marital difficulties, including disputes, alleged physical and sexual abuse by Ben, and the stress associated with his snake breeding business, Lindley feared him and was concerned about his mood when she would bring up the topic of divorce on June 8, 2017. Hence, she brought Michael Humphrey to the farm that day. She claimed her presence at the farm was not to end her husband's life, but to request a divorce. Lindley said she took some trash from Ben to dispose of. Then she entered the nursery, where she saw Humphrey and Ben finishing washing their hands. Lindley recounted not being able to hear their conversation, focused more on how to tell Ben she wanted a divorce. Lindley's voice trembled as she described seeing Humphrey draw a pistol and shoot her husband. I screamed and ran outside. Then I heard a few more shots, everything went numb, and I remember just staring at the trees and Michael as he ran up to me and pushed me towards the car, Lindley testified in court. Reality hit when she returned to the snake breeding facility and discovered Ben's body. Lindley called Ben's brother, Sam, who arrived. They checked for a pulse and whether Ben was breathing, thinking he might still be alive. Lindley expressed regret for not telling the police then and there that she had been at the breeding facility earlier with Michael Humphrey and not sharing her version of events. As she was suspected in her husband's death, the life insurance policy Ben Renick had taken out years earlier could mean a payout of $1 million. Lindley waived her rights to this money. Ben Renick became the beneficiary of a trust after his father's death. His assets went to Ben Renick and his children, not Lindley. Nonetheless, Lindley received money she had contributed to the trust and a scholarship for her daughter.
Lindley confessed she sought support, so she shared her version of events with her then-boyfriend Brandon Blackwell. However, that relationship ended as soon as Lindley had Brandon's child. During the court hearing, Lindley shared her regrets about her continuous deception. "I was just trying to escape from the truth of what happened," she said, adding that she never wished for her husband's death. Lindley Renick's defense team did not petition for a new trial following the final verdict. No appeals were filed against her conviction. Lindley Renick filed a defamation lawsuit against Blackwell, claiming his statements about her involvement in her husband's death were false. However, prosecutor Kevin Zellner questioned Lindley Renick's testimony during cross-examination. He queried why she did not check on her husband after hearing gunshots, why she did not call 911, why she sent friendly messages to him and Humphrey after the shooting, and why she continued to lie even as emergency responders got involved. Renick admitted to suggesting the police consider Ben's brother as a suspect. Often tearful and somber during her testimony, prosecutor Zellner portrayed her as a mastermind, albeit a clumsy one. He described her as cruel enough to accuse the deceased's brother, saying during his rebuttal, "Do you know how cold your heart is?" During the sentencing for second-degree murder and armed criminal action, Lindley Renick broke down. She did not admit her guilt. On December 9, 2021, she was found guilty of second-degree murder. The 33-year-old Lindley Renick was sentenced to 13 years for murder and an additional 3 years for armed criminal action. In January, Judge Kevin Crane handed down a total sentence of 16 years. The sentence outraged Sam and other relatives of Ben. They believed that Michael and Lindley deserved life imprisonment, as they were both as guilty as any other co-conspirators. Sam Renick's final words expressed complete disappointment. He was astonished that the life of a person in Missouri could be valued at just 13 years. Ben Renick was a young man full of hope, with a potentially bright future. Due to the actions of one woman, he and Sam found themselves in a difficult situation, now unable to mend their relationship. Yet, the great snake breeder, Ben Renick, continues to live on in a way he would surely have appreciated. He became famous for breeding a new snake species named after him. The reptile community was shaken by Ben Renick's death and wanted to help. They collected and donated money to support Ben's family. Ben's valuable snakes were dispersed and sold to various reptile experts and enthusiasts, while the main snake in Ben's life was sentenced to 13 years. And we may never truly know who actually pulled the trigger, as this story is filled with the lies of the most vile and despicable reptile, Lindley Renick. A complex crime. The incident that occurred in late summer 2016 at Spring Creek Park sparked a wave of public outrage. How many similar tragedies must happen before New York City authorities listen to the citizens' pleas? Local residents had repeatedly alerted authorities about the presence of unsettling individuals in the park. Some of them would gather in groups while others wandered alone. Either way, their appearance evoked a sense of danger. Regrettably, it took a crime for the city administration to finally take action and address this issue. Additionally, the event led to numerous discussions and topics about the safety of female runners, particularly those who exercise alone. According to a survey, 54% of women feel anxious when they go out, fearing they might be subjected to verbal harassment or physical attacks. The story of Karina Vetrano is both horrifying and baffling, firstly because nothing seemed amiss on the day of the fateful event. The attack on the woman occurred in broad daylight, in a fairly populated area. Secondly, her death has a mystical aspect to it. And thirdly, the investigation of the case, as well as the sentencing of the perpetrator, raised many questions. On Tuesday, August 2nd, 2016, Karina arranged to meet her father after work. They wanted to spend time together. Since Miss Vetrano had moved, family gatherings had become rare because everyone was busy with their own things. In addition, the young woman was combining two jobs. Philip picked up his daughter and took her to his home. There, the family shared their impressions of the past week. When Karina was about to go home, she asked her father if he wanted to go jogging with her, as they often did, covering several miles together. Her father replied that he couldn't this time. "You see, my back hurts so badly that nothing helps. Maybe a new prescription is needed. Or maybe it's the change in the weather," Mr. Vetrano explained. "Maybe I should call you a cab." The weather was beautiful, the heat had abated, and there was a fresh smell in the air. Therefore, Karina declined the offer. Besides, she was training for the upcoming marathon. The young woman had recently broken up with her boyfriend and wanted to distract herself. A jog would clearly do her good. That evening was the last time the parents saw their youngest daughter. At 5:45 p.m., she left the house for a jog. Her first stop was Spring Creek Park, a cozy, tranquil place buried in greenery. A true paradise amongst the city's infrastructure. However, only part of the park was available for walking. The rest was covered with thickets and swamps. Mr. Vetrano asked his daughter to stick to her usual route, to stay away from unfamiliar paths and people. Unfortunately, Karina ignored his advice. In search of solitude, she decided to go to a grassy, deserted place. Karina's thoughts were abruptly interrupted. She felt a sharp pain in the back of her head, and she fell down. This rash decision cost the young woman her life. A frightening uncertainty entered the Vetrano home. It had been 2 hours since they had said goodbye to their youngest daughter. She should have been home by now, or at least answering the calls of her parents, who were frantically trying to reach her. And she had promised to keep her cell phone to herself. The anxiety was growing. Her father sensed that something was wrong and decided to seek help from his neighbor, the chief of the New York City Police Department. They were on good terms, and the high-ranking official knew that Philip would not make a fuss over nothing. After that, Karina Vetrano was reported missing. Police began searching for the young woman, combing the park area and surrounding streets. As a result, experienced canine units were brought in. As it is known, the first 24 hours after the disappearance of a person are crucial and most informative. Therefore, law enforcement utilized all available resources before nightfall. At the same time, Mr. Vetrano,
along with a group of volunteers, searched for his daughter on his own. He scoured the park from end to end, combing the paths and wading through the tall grass, all the while making phone calls. As dusk fell, the man noticed a light in the grass. As he approached, he recognized Karina's phone. Maybe she lost her cell phone and just didn't let us know. Philip hoped. The patriarch of the family headed toward the police officers, deciding to pick his way through the thicket. Stepping into the grass, he came across something soft. A partially undressed female corpse lay face down. Philip turned it over and saw a familiar face. A desperate scream burst from his father's chest. It was Karina. She hadn't lost her phone like he thought. His little girl wasn't answering her phone because she had been robbed of her life. The realization of what had happened overwhelmed Mr. Vetrano. Hearing the screaming and yelling, the police rushed to him. They dragged Philippe away from his daughter's body, trying to explain that this was now a crime scene. Anything in the area was considered evidence. To prevent the evidence from being tampered with, the law enforcement officers asked the father of the deceased not to touch anything. On the way home, Mr. Vetrano thought a lot. He was tormented by how to tell his wife about their daughter's death. Images of the past flashed before his eyes. He remembered how on July 12, 1986, in Queens, their second daughter was born. Philip had been proud of her from an early age. She was obedient and well-mannered. He vividly remembered taking her to her first day of school, how well she did in her studies. Such education enabled her to earn a higher degree. Karina graduated from St. John's University with a master's degree in speech pathology. She had always dreamed of helping children and worked with artistic kids. His daughter was multifaceted. She loved to travel and write. She adored sports, especially running. Their shared passion brought them closer. She was his inspiration. The father remembered how jealously he treated her suitors. He so wanted her to be truly loved, hoping that she would eventually create a strong family like he and Kathy had, and give him wonderful grandchildren. The return journey turned into an eternity. At the entrance to the house, Mr. Vetrano paused, taking a deep breath. "I need to be strong to support my family. I have to pull myself together," the man commanded himself. His wife met him at the threshold. Fortunately, he didn't need to explain anything to her. She understood everything from her husband's face. Kathy cried, approached her husband, and hugged him. Soon, Karina's relatives and friends learned of the incident. They struggled to recover from the shock. Believing in the sudden death of the young woman was hard, let alone accepting its violent nature. Miss Vetrano had been subjected to a brutal attack. This was the conclusion reached by investigators. At first glance, it was obvious that the woman had resisted. Even in death, her fists remained clenched. Bruises and abrasions were found on her once young and healthy body, and her athletic clothing was torn. The autopsy showed that the back of the victim's skull had been damaged by a blunt object, probably a stone. However, the cause of death was asphyxiation. A clear mark was visible on the woman's neck. The forensic examination also revealed the intimate nature of the crime: violence. The experts' findings confirmed the police's initial suspicions. Earth and grass were found under the victim's fingernails, probably in an attempt to free herself from her attacker's grip and escape. Specialists examined her mouth and found her teeth knocked out and cracked in places. She had clearly bitten to defend herself. Even the woman's neck was covered with numerous scratches. She was grabbing with her hands, trying to force her attacker to let go of her. Karina did not want to die and fought hard for her life. Karina Vetrano's youngest daughter, Karina, had a variety of interests, but she especially loved writing. In 2013, she starred in a short movie by her friend and screenwriter Petros Georgiadis, which was based on a poem she had written, Paradox. In her blogs, the girl often addressed complex issues, often touching on the topics of love and the end of life. Shortly after this tragedy, new information was leaked to the media. In Princeton, Massachusetts, the body of another jogger was found among the tall grass. The woman, apparently also out for a walk in a secluded place, suffered a similar fate. At first glance, the cases were identical. Could there be another serial offender in America? The case was taken up by geneticists, who were tasked with comparing DNA samples collected from the crime scenes. As luck would have it, unidentified samples were found on both victims. Contrary to police expectations, the analysis revealed no connection between the crimes. It turned out that the DNA samples belonged to different people. Particularly intriguing is the story surrounding the DNA material taken from under her fingernails, on her back, and from Karina Vetrano's phone. The DNA was found in small quantities, but was deemed sufficient for analysis by experts. For a long time, this DNA remained the only lead in the investigation, giving a chance to identify the perpetrator. It is known that most life-ending crimes are committed by someone close to the victim, so the police could not dismiss any possibility. For this purpose, the victim's father provided his DNA as he was the one who first discovered his daughter's body. However, the timing for this procedure was poorly chosen. It took place on the day of Karina's funeral. Later, all of the woman's relatives also underwent a DNA test, which did not give any matches. Detectives decided to interview Karina's relatives and friends, finding out if Mrs. Vetrano had any enemies or ill wishers. It turned out that there were none. Everyone respected and loved her. Then the investigators developed a new version. The deed was committed from base motives. Someone met the beautiful Karina in a secluded place and attacked her, giving in to base motives. At a loss, the investigation sought the public's help by offering a $10,000 reward for information that could lead to the perpetrator. The initiative received a widespread response. Detectives explored some 250 leads, conducted 600 genetic tests, and compiled more than 1,700 reports, all to no avail. It seemed that the perpetrator had not committed crimes before, at least not been caught for them, which further complicated the investigation. On August 31st, 2016, a utility worker approached the police station with some information. At the time of Miss Vetrano's death, he was in a restricted area of the park and saw a man emerge from the bushes who then ran in a northerly direction. Based on his testimony, the New York Police Department developed and distributed a sketch of the suspect in December 2016. However, it took into account that the person depicted in the sketch could have been a passerby who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Unfortunately, the release of the sketch of the suspected perpetrator provided no new information, and the investigation reached another long stalemate. On December 4th, 2016, the Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the investigation into the death of Karina Vetrano. Initially, they developed a psychological profile of the perpetrator. According to FBI experts, the individual was very familiar with the area, especially the park where the incident occurred, suggesting the possibility that the assailant lived or continues to live nearby. However, fearing capture, he now avoids the area. It was clear he understood that the quiet, partially overgrown territory was ideal for concealing his act. Based on this theory, the police conducted screenings among local African American men, but this did not yield the desired result. Chanel Lewis's life didn't particularly stand out from other young African American individuals. He lived in one of Brooklyn's low-income housing complexes, about 4-5 miles from Spring Creek Park. Unemployed, Chanel lived with his mother, 3 sisters, and their children. Perhaps the only detail that set him apart was his diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. Nonetheless, this didn't prevent him from graduating from a private school for students with emotional and behavioral issues. Former classmates remembered Chanel as a quiet loner. The kids constantly picked on him, one of them shared. Girls even intimidated and punched him. He had no friends. Another peer mentioned that Lewis sometimes fought back, but not effectively. He was often ridiculed for his clothing and appearance. Chanel always wore a hoodie and would smirk and walk away in difficult situations, earning him the nickname African Lizard. However, a fellow student, 17-year-old Danielle Nunes, described Chanel as a smart kid with good grades. "He liked to show me funny videos on the bus," she recalled. "I never saw him be cruel." Some sources reported that the young man once claimed he wanted to cut all the girls, asking during his time in middle school, "What happens if I bring a knife to school?" Dr. Edward Dana, the executive director of the school to which Chanel was transferred, commented on this. "We received no reports of threats in middle school. During his time at our school, he had no disciplinary sanctions. I never heard him make threatening statements towards other students." Nonetheless, Chanel was a traumatized teenager who often experienced bullying. He dreamed of working in social services, wanting to help those in distress. When conflicts arose at home, he would wander the streets, frequently visiting the park. Lewis had several minor encounters with the police, 2 for violations in Spring Creek and 1 for urinating in public. In May 2016, another incident occurred when a local merchant reported Lewis for loitering in his store with a crowbar. Responding officers checked Chanel's ID and released him, as he had no prior incidents. However, this information was retained by the police and would later play a crucial role in the investigation into Karina Vetrano's death. In February 2017, Detective John Rocio, who was involved in the investigation, remembered something significant. He had repeatedly seen a young man in a hoodie wandering the park. John even attempted to follow him once, intrigued by the individual's behavior. The young man walked slowly, stopping for long periods in front of houses near the park as if scouting them for potential burglaries. However, Rocio lost sight of him when he contacted his colleagues by phone. The next day, following a store owner's report, a teenager matching the description came to the police's attention. 2 months into the investigation, John Rocio recalled this wanderer, thinking he might have seen or heard something relevant. Investigators zeroed in on Chanel Lewis after Detective Rocio took a closer look at the young man's file. Chanel's peculiarities raised interest. The police began to inquire about him among acquaintances and teachers, and information surfaced that he had allegedly expressed a desire to harm girls. This news stirred concern and suspicion. With no other leads, officers decided to focus on Lewis. It was later discovered that during the time of Karina's death, Chanel was not at home. After an argument with his family, he had gone to the park. Upon his return, his appearance was disheveled, with torn clothing and visible bruises and abrasions. His mother inquired about what had happened, and Lewis claimed he had been attacked. His account matched the timeline with a witness's description of a man fleeing the park. Additionally, on August 3, 2016, Lewis's father, a former school principal, took him to the hospital for treatment of severe wounds, most of which were cuts, and he also had an injured hand. The investigators reviewed the medical records from that day and found the story plausible. However, they saw it differently, noting similarities between the events involving Chanel Lewis and Karina Vetrano. On February 4, 2017, Chanel was brought to the police station and voluntarily provided his DMA for analysis. Would a perpetrator willingly do this? Detectives wondered. The interrogation began on the morning of February 5th. Lewis admitted that he was indeed in the park around 5 p.m. on August 2, 2016, but clarified he was walking on dirt paths, not through the thickets, and listening to music. He confessed to encountering a young woman jogging with her phone in her hand. When asked by detectives if something happened when he encountered her, Chanel nodded and quietly said, "Yes." Everyone was stunned. His response was vague, indicating confusion. "I was angry. One thing led to another. What happened, happened," he finally stated clearly. Investigators were skeptical of this semi-admission, fearing it might provoke doubt among jurors during a trial. They waited for Chanel to elaborate. "I was walking in the park, trying to distract myself from a family argument. Then I met a woman. She was alone. I decided to follow her. When she passed by me, I grabbed her shoulders, threw her to the ground, and hit her face about 5 times so she couldn't scream. My punches knocked out several of her teeth, injuring my hand," Chanel recalled. He also added that the struggle lasted about 5 minutes. Miss Vetrano fiercely resisted, scratching and biting. To avoid attracting attention, Lewis dragged her from the path into tall grass, where he attempted to undress and assault her. She was shocked, but continued to resist. Chanel then forcefully strangled her until he realized she was no longer alive. When asked if he knew the victim beforehand, he replied, "I did not know her before this. It all happened by chance." The motive for the act became even more unexpected and bizarre. It turns out, loud music played by a neighborhood gang member for hours on end triggered Chanel's hatred and uncontrollable aggression. These negative emotions were unleashed on the unfortunate woman, a strange reason for an act indeed.
Investigators' confusion was dispelled when DNA comparison results matched perfectly. Microscopic traces found on the victim's body and phone belonged to Chanel. Consequently, the police and the prosecutor concluded the case was solved and ready for court. However, the motive still seemed implausible. It's possible Chanel had noticed Karina before, as he often frequented the park
And might have seen her with her father. He liked her and decided to approach her. But after being rejected, he became angry and struck her, and the situation spiraled out of control. This scenario would have been more understandable. On November 5, 2018, the trial against Chanel Lewis began. Despite his earlier statements to the authorities, Lewis pleaded not guilty, a stance echoed by his family, denying his involvement in the crime. The prosecution charged Lewis with ending a life and sexual assault, facing him with a sentence ranging from 25 years to life imprisonment. The debate over Lewis's guilt not only unfolded in the courtroom, but also spilled over into the media. Lewis's defense team stirred the pot, pointing out alleged legal violations during his arrest. Along with various news outlets, they claimed racial bias and discrimination. However, the judge dismissed these allegations as baseless, emphasizing that the investigation complied with legal standards. The prosecution presented tangible evidence and DNA analysis findings. The defense argued that the evidence was insufficient and contaminated, given the large number of people at the crime scene, including the victim's father who discovered her body. Forensic biologist Linda Razzano stated the odds of the DNA belonging to someone other than Lewis were 1 in 6 trillion. The prosecutor also introduced Lewis's phone records, revealing his internet searches on second chances and forgiveness in Catholicism, prompting the question, what sin was Chanel hoping to atone for? The release of Lewis's confession video sparked further controversy, with his lawyers arguing he was under immense pressure, leading to a coerced confession. They suspected the police of fabricating evidence, claiming the recording began only after Lewis was pressured, and that the search of his home violated protocols. The defense suggested the investigation into Karina Vetrano's death was initially botched, with public pressure mounting for an arrest leading to Lewis becoming a scapegoat. The jury was struck by the defense's powerful arguments. After hearing both sides, they were unable to reach a conclusive verdict. On November 21, 2018, the judge declared a mistrial, with a retrial initially scheduled for January 22, 2019, but later postponed to March 2019. After 5 hours of deliberation, Chanel Lewis was ultimately found guilty of Karina Vetrano's death and sentenced to life without parole on July 23, 2019. The defense's delay tactics included citing an anonymous source to allege misconduct by a juror, suggesting jury pressure and a conspiracy, with some calling the trial a lynch mob. The case, seemingly straightforward at first, ignited widespread prejudices and fears in society. Karina Vetrano's death touched many, serving as a grim reminder for women to be cautious. Did justice prevail? In any case, a young woman's life was cut short, and Chanel Lewis was sentenced to life imprisonment. Both families lost their children. The hope remains that the truth was indeed uncovered.
Otherwise, an innocent man is behind bars while the perpetrator remains free.